Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I'm the president of Ubiquity University. And on behalf of our extraterrestrial studies department, which is being developed with Bertie Jaworski and her organization, Transdimensional Mapping, I want to welcome all of you to this Psionics Summit. And I would like to thank my good friend Sean Hesburn-Hargens and the California Institute for Human Sciences, which is co-sponsoring with us, and Richard Dolan and his organization, which is live streaming. I just noted that we're well over 1,000 people on this Zoom call. The other people are watching through the live streaming partners. And I just want to thank everybody who has taken the time to join us today, because I think we're at a watershed that I'd like to comment on as we open, because I think with the emergence of the term and the domain of psionics, we have reached a watershed in the disclosure movement. If you think about most of the last 75, 80 years since the end of the Second World War, the overwhelming preoccupation has been on hardware, retrieved craft, retrieved biologics, sightings of UFOs, trying to prove through scientific measurements that they actually exist. And then over the last 4 or 5 years, really since the New York Times article in December of 2017, when for the first time a major world newspaper essentially said that the US government knows what's going on, there's been a rising crescendo of incontrovertible evidence that has led to the conclusion articulated most concisely by Colonel Carl Nell, that there's now zero doubt. The US government is in possession of retrieved craft, retrieved biologics. They've had programs for many, many decades that have been tracking this. And the cover-up is gradually, inexorably falling away. And then within the last few months, starting in November of last year, 2024, the world was visited by literally thousands of what were initially called drones, then orbs, then UAP, and nobody seemed to know what was really going on. And the US government and the FBI and the Pentagon and all the three-letter agencies really couldn't provide an answer for what most people intuited was actually true. And that is that we were bearing witness to a global phenomenon of orbs, of non-human intelligences. And right in the middle of that, an interview between Ross Coulthard and Jake Barber, which I'll get to in a moment, introduced us to psionics. And now, as we move into the future, our attention is being directed toward the field of consciousness that we're coming to understand our cosmic visitors are fluent in. And that if we humans can upgrade our facilities, our faculties of mental telepathy and remote viewing and clairvoyance, we can begin to engage in intelligible communication with these beings and find out who they are, why they're here, what they're doing, and whether or not humanity and these advanced civilizations and advanced beings can engage in an interactivity that is constructive, that is positive, and which will take our species into the next phase of its evolutionary journey as we turn our attention from exclusively terrestrial concerns to now embracing the cosmos and visitors that have come from other star systems and other dimensions to our planet at a very specific time in human history, where we're gripped by things getting worse and worse, better and better, faster and faster. And because we haven't been paying attention as we should, we teeter on the brink of self-destruction. And in some mysterious way that I don't think any of us fully understand, we are being given incontrovertible evidence that we are not alone right at the moment when we most need it, because this awareness, most fundamentally, if we embrace it with an open heart, can be a catalyst to the kind of transformation that we all seek. Not only between each other, but between humanity and the larger planetary ecosystem and the outer reaches of the cosmos itself. I think there's no doubt in anybody's mind who seriously contemplates this moment that we're not only bearing witness, but we are experiencing the most potentiated event in all of human history. And our generation, those of us on this online summit, and thousands of you that are out there that care passionately about the emerging phenomenon of UAP and NHI, by whatever name, we're midwifing the next era. And our capacity to do this consciously, open-heartedly, is the key to our success. So it's in this spirit, everyone, that I want to welcome you all to our Psionics Summit. We've divided the program into two parts. We want to start with a contemplation of what is psionics. It was a new term to me when I first heard it last year, and then again very recently. And so we're going to spend some time just unpacking it, because one of the things that's so exciting about what's going on is we're all having to develop new language to describe a phenomenon that's getting increasingly differentiated. You know, the Eskimos have about 40, 50 words for snow. The Tibetan Buddhists have, I think, 60, 70 words for consciousness. And up until very recently, we only had one word for this entire phenomenon, and that was UFO. And so one of the things that's very exciting is the creating of new terms. So psionics is the term that we want to contemplate. And then after we contemplate that, we're going to look into some of the dimensions and some of the implications of what it means for humans to begin to play consciously in the field of consciousness with advanced beings. We want to start with Ross Coulthart. And I want to introduce Ross in the following way. I don't know of any journalist anywhere out there that has done more than Ross to bring to our collective attention the realities of UAP. He's been tireless. He's been courageous. You'll remember his interview with David Grush back in 2023, which basically blew the lid off the entire discussion up to that moment. And he's just done it again with Jake Barber, who we're going to hear from after Russ. Ross Coulthart, thank you for everything that you've done, my friend. He's getting up very early in Australia, so it's only 6 o'clock in the morning. But Ross, I want to welcome you and just ask you to define in your own way what you mean by psionics and what are some of the implications of all of us taking this in as we further deepen our awareness of the unidentified anomalous phenomena who are becoming so pressingly present with us around our Earth.
Well, firstly, hello, g'day, Jim, and hello to everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I don't know what time it is where you all are, but this does appear to be a truly international event. I was reading the chat just now, and I noticed that somebody described the event as a psychonautical event. And I guess that makes me the navigator strapped to the wheel in the stormy seas of psionics. And I have to try and explain what psionics are. Many years ago, when I first started investigating this issue, standing on the shoulders of fantastic researchers like Richard Dolan and other people in the field, I heard the mention of the term, you can't get into the subject of UFOs without first talking about consciousness. And that's very much at the heart of what I've been investigating for much of the last 7 years. I never understood what that meant, and it really didn't make much sense to me until very recently. But I think Jim's right. We've been excessively focused, in fact, ridiculously focused on the technology of the phenomenon. And I always thought, as somebody said online on the chat just now, it was hippy dippy bullshit to talk about the consciousness and to try and associate it in some way with what I clearly felt was a non-human intelligence, an alien intelligence driving technology to our planet, and that it was a simple matter of telling the story of a non-human intelligence engaging with us through highly advanced technology. End of story. But as your psychonaut, I've come to the realization that psionics is essentially the most important aspect of the whole phenomenon, and it's been there under our noses all along. What we're talking about is, I suspect, a hitherto unrealized inherent capacity of probably all humans to engage, yes, spiritually, with the phenomenon. Uh, the evidence has been there all along with the work, for example, being done by Professor Gary Nolan and others, looking at the fact that there is growing evidence that the um, brain in people who've had close encounters with the phenomenon often displays enlarged neuron activity in the base of the basal ganglia, the cotati putamen. And the suggestion is that somehow through the pineal gland, there is perhaps a capacity to engage psychically, psionically, with another realm. And I'm fascinated with this as an Australian because I have many Aboriginal friends who for years have talked to me about the dream time. And it is very much part of Aboriginal culture that the nomadic Aboriginal tribes that lived in Australia across many thousands of kilometres, had a connection with their past and with their kin and with each other through a spiritual realm that I don't think we've ever really quite understood. But the idea is that through some kind of notion of astral traveling, they were able to communicate over vast distances. And I noticed that this is very much part of Native American mythology and ideas as well, that there's this capacity for a connection with a higher realm. And I really can't believe as a journalist, as a serious INSEC journalist, that I'm going down this path, because to me it's antithetical to common sense to start talking about things that are really at the moment scientifically unproven. But what I can tell you is that I've witnessed it. I have seen what does appear to be a correlation between a very strong guided meditation by somebody with psionic abilities, where they have been able to summon or attract or perhaps invite the phenomenon to engage. And I witnessed this at Esalen, which is a retreat 3.5 hours drive south of San Francisco on the coast, beautiful place. And while we were there, one of the people that's now working with the Skywatcher team, uh, he told me that afternoon, shortly before sunset, that we were going to see a blue orb. And in the course of the evening, he summoned two golden orbs, and they literally arrived, moved closer and closer towards us from the horizon, and did appear to respond to his entreaties and our entreaties to come closer. The scientist in me would obviously say that there's not necessarily causation. I need more proof to prove that in my mind. But I would see correlation, that certainly there was something that appeared to manifest itself at the same time as we were doing what seemed to be like a mass meditation, inviting the phenomenon to engage. What's intrinsic to it? Well, delightfully, love. Um, all of us at the event were full of joy, love. There was a sense of happiness that this was happening. There was a sense of beauty and wonderment. Um, and I can tell you that when I first met Jake Barber, that was the sense that it was communicated to me through him and his colleagues, hardened. I mean, all of them are men who've worked in the black world, men who've worked as professional soldiers, intelligence officers, trained to kill people with the dark side to their character. And all of them had been profoundly affected, deeply, spiritually, in a way that was transformative by this engagement with this experience. And so psionics to me is a broad term to describe a human capacity to engage psychically in some way with the phenomenon. And I'm fascinated, especially by the work of Stu Hameroff, who actually was at Esalen. He's a neuroscientist who's done a lot of really early work into what are called microtubules, which he believes are the scientific reason why this connection is possible. And as is so often the case, I think material science is only now catching up with what I suspect has been known by humanity and lost by our technologically crowded world by much of humanity. But we've known it for thousands of years, this capacity to engage with a phenomenon that is in another realm. And I think we're on the beginning of how does one say it, a psychonautical journey. And yes, as I noticed somebody earlier referred to it as hippy dippy shit, it bloody well is, and you'd better get used to it because it's going to be a rocky ride. I'm happy to answer any more questions, Jim, but I hope that serves as an introduction to psionics.
Thank you so much, Ross. Just one additional question. Have you yourself had an experience that you would characterize as psionic in some way? You've mentioned that people that you know, but you've been at this, exploring it more deeply than most, and I'm just wondering about your own personal experience.
Um, I haven't been able to. I've spent a lot of time trying to learn how to meditate, and I'm getting reasonably advanced at it. I have a beautiful field near my home where I go and lie down on the grass and I look up at the stars, and I certainly invite the phenomenon to manifest itself. I have a daughter who frequently engages with the phenomenon, and it manifests itself quite overtly to her. But my dear friends, one of whom, JP Haig, is gifted with the ability to engage in this way, he tells me he thinks the phenomenon is keeping me skeptical by not manifesting itself to me so overtly. Um, but what I have had is a strong sense in my work as a journalist of being serendipitously pushed. Um, I cannot explain the weirdness, the high strangeness of working as a journalist in this field. I think a lot of professions. My dad was a doctor, and I tell this story often. Late in his life, he admitted to me that all of his life as a doctor, he developed the ability to see auras around people, and that he could sense when people were ill by looking at their auras. And I have to admit, I thought the old duffer was going a bit senile, and I took it with a grain of salt. But now that I think back and realize what he was talking about, I suspect that there are gifts that humans have that we don't realize are intuitive. And I've had a long sense in my journalistic career, which is a long and varied one, of being pushed occasionally, of guided, gently nudged. And I can often not explain why I've felt an inclination to go down a certain path for investigation. And certainly in the field of UAPs, I set out 7 years ago to write a book to debunk all this UFO nonsense. I was absolutely convinced I was going to prove that it was a black world US Air Force program, and it was only a matter of time before I found this technology buried in a hill somewhere, and it was all complete balderdash. And hilariously, I found myself being serendipitously pushed and guided into what is now a full-time obsession with the reality of this phenomenon. And that includes the technology, if you like, of UAPs. But I think the technology is the least interesting aspect. And I now understand what people were talking about from the intelligence community when they said to me all those years ago in a Georgetown bar, if you want to understand UAPs, you have to understand human consciousness.
Yeah. Mm. Thank you, Ross. We'll circle back to you in the discussion, but thank you so much for everything that you've done to bring this term into our awareness. So thank you so much. We want to now turn to Jake Barber, who I was hoping would be live with us today, but only a few days ago he told Ross and I, and it was Ross that set up the arrangement with Jake, that he's been called out into the desert. And so we quickly put together an interview. Gare will play the interview. And I asked him the same question I've asked Ross and all of you. What to him is psionics?
Right on.
Hello, Jake. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. I'd like to begin our conversation with just asking you to explain in your own way what you mean by psionics.
For sure. Yeah, psionics, it's kind of a fun word. What do I mean by psionics? Well, I can share what my understanding of it is. Psionics, I think, let me back up and say that, I didn't get into this world of psionics or consciousness, through the front door, let's say. It wasn't something I was pursuing or that I had a background in educationally. I came in through a window, if you follow me with that analogy. And so I took an interest in it because of my own experience that happened at a very unexpected time in my life. But since then is when I've really began to explore what that really does mean. And I'm excited to share that with others. And my message is one of invitation, not education. I'm not here to insist or sell people on the idea they should take my interpretation of my experiences and my subsequent education through the pursuit of knowledge of and personal understanding of what it means. But I want to invite everyone to get out there and play with this thing, because what's beautiful is that it's available to everyone. And one of the analogies that's helped me look at this is the idea of the World Wide Web. Like, if you think of consciousness as the World Wide Web, and the degree to which we can play within that field of consciousness is something like psionics, then I think you're on a good track. And it might not, I've thought about this recently, it might not even be an analogy. It might like literally be a form of digital intelligence or digital consciousness that the World Wide Web might be evolving into. You know, that's yet to be determined. But, you know, why is this hard to understand, or why is it abstract for people? Again, this is where I think analogies are helpful. You know, so if you think of a field of consciousness like the internet, it's around us all the time. It's full of information. It's a two-way thing. People contribute. You can upload to it. You could download from it, but you can't see it. Like, I couldn't point to it here in this room. And so our ability to connect to that World Wide Web is done through something like a Wi-Fi connection. And I think some of the challenges, even with the practical applications of that, are rooted in our own ego. You could think of our ego like a smartphone. Let's say you have the latest version of the Apple smartphone, and you're like, this is the smartest phone there is. It's got all these widgets on it. It's got this much gigabyte. It's got this fancy of a camera. But for some reason, you're still not able to use it to tap into the field of consciousness. Well, I would say that that's because you're in airplane mode. And so people need to learn how to activate the Wi-Fi on their cell phone to tap into this field of consciousness. So, you know, it also helps for me to think about, you know, the difference between our intelligence, our knowledge, our wisdom, and then our intuition. So intuition is a word that we find ourselves using a lot when we talk about consciousness. And why I think that is because intuition's a little bit different than the first three. You know, someone with good intuition, or a high level of knowledge, or a high level of intelligence, or a high level of wisdom, you would probably in general say, hey, those are smart people. Like, what makes people smart? Like the smartphone. And I think it's important to kind of differentiate between those four. And this is what I have done that has helped me out a lot. You know, when you think of knowledge, let's just say, is like rote information. You have the ability to retain and share knowledge. Like, you could go on Jeopardy and clear all the categories on Jeopardy. That's rote knowledge. But the practical application of that knowledge is something different. So that moves us more into like, well, you're smart, but you're not very intelligent. Is that possible? Perhaps, because I look at intelligence more as like a set of problem-solving skills. You can solve problems. And then the other category over here, wisdom. Well, what is wisdom, and how is that different than knowledge and intelligence? Well, wisdom to me seems to be something like the ability to make good decisions, fruitful decisions. And then lastly, well, intuition. How would you differentiate intuition? And intuition is something like being able to make the right decision at the right time. And it's something like this internal bell. It's how I think of it, that can ring true inside of your being. And when something rings true, there's really no explanation as to why you're attracted or oriented to it, but it's leading you a certain way. And so I feel every human has this bell that can ring true inside of them, and that's your intuition, and it can drive decision making. So, you know, to pull this back to, you know, what is psionics? I think psionics is our ability to play within the consciousness field for desired outcomes, rather than just connect to it. So again, to stick with this analogy, the World Wide Web, imagine, okay, you figured this out. You've connected to the field of consciousness. And I'll talk about how, crudely, how I understand to do that and what's been successful for me so that other people can try this on their own. But imagine you're connected and you get a Google search bar. You have to put something in that search bar. You're connected, but you have to have some intention. And intention is a really important thing because without intention, you have no driving force. And if we consider that maybe every living thing in the universe has access to this consciousness field, you need to bring intention in order to find what you're looking for. So you have to populate that search bar with something. And so bringing some good intentions, what you consider good, which at the most fundamental level, without getting, to angels and demons on you, is just to go there with the intent that it's going to be worthwhile and you're going to find something that is worthwhile to you. And I think finding that space is really important if you're going to try and connect to the field of consciousness. There's several ways to do it. I mean, meditation comes up a lot in conversation. You can meditate. And for me, it's like, well, what does meditation look like? How do we find our own consciousness? How do we separate from our observer point of view inside our own head when thoughts are coming in, where they're coming from? Is this my intellect? Is this my knowledge system? Is this my wisdom? Is this something that's inside my head that can be tracked? Or is this something that's coming from an external source? And this is where I find meditation is so valuable, because meditation could be thought of as something like creating a defensible space in your mind that is like blacked out, where you are quieting, or you're at least starting by observing your own thoughts and then trying to source the origin of those thoughts. Because we all have thoughts. Some of the most easy sources to identify are things that are consistent with our instincts. Like, am I thinking about food? Well, I'm hungry. Am I thinking about food, survival? Am I thinking about procreation, defending myself? Those are all thoughts that will probably populate our head, from the limbic portion of our brain. Then we have other thoughts, which are like intelligent thoughts, are these things we have learned that fascinate us, that puzzles we like solving. That's our intelligence at play, and we can source those. But when you get really good at creating this defensible space and being able to identify thoughts and push away thoughts that you can identify as coming from some internal origin, what gets really interesting is that you'll begin to have thoughts or ideas that you can't source the outcome from. And I believe those are coming through a conduit of intuition. And when you're applying that intuition, that connection, I think you're in the purest form of Wi-Fi connection to the consciousness field, which is where exciting things start to happen, if any of that makes sense.
Yeah, then that's the realm of remote viewing, remote perception, for example, that
Yes.
With intent, one can see objects hidden, under a pillow in another room or on the other side of the world. So this is very important, because you're identifying psionics as the relationship between us and this larger field of consciousness, and our ability to align with it and enter it and go places.
And go
And
places.
interact with beings like extraterrestrials, NHI, that communicate through mental telepathy, and they're fluent in the language of consciousness.
They are.
And we have to become fluent in the language of consciousness in order to engage in intelligible communication. And so that's the realm of psionics.
Yeah, I like the idea of fluency being something there. I think too about, we've been sending RF and radar signals out into the universe for decades now, and we're waiting for something to reply back in that language. An RF signal, it's like, the search for SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Thank you. But we're speaking that language I think it might be the case that they've been transmitting to us through consciousness, but again, we're not listening to that signal as often. Or there have been times throughout history where we have, but the technology has been lost. And that technology is a soft tissued spiritual form of technology because it's in there. And that's the reason I encourage everyone to, because you can figure this out on your own really quickly just by practicing it. And there are people out there that are inherently better at this than others, just like some people are better at anything, take to music more naturally. Some people are more athletic. There are some people that have this bell inside of them that rings true. And I think they could have even more success than me or any other person if they have that predisposition. There's only one way to find out is you go there and practice something with prayer or meditation, and you're going to be surprised at what you find.
Yeah, and Skywatcher, your company, you employ remote viewers and make a very sophisticated application of psionics in your interactions with the non-human intelligences that are out there. And if I understand it correctly from your various interviews, your team is capable of actually not only communicating, but drawing them down in a mutually intentional way.
Yes. Yeah. And so to explain how that works, I'll go back to the idea of we've accessed the World Wide Web and the search bar pops up. Through the process, you can request with your intent. Think of it as typing in, I would like to meet you, NHI, whoever you are, and you put that intention, you put that in your search bar of your consciousness web browser, and guess what? It populates, the search field populates, and you get messages, but you can also get tangible things to show up. You can get things to show up that people that aren't necessarily involved with your psionic protocol to actually see the response that you're getting, which is really exciting.
Jake, I wish we could go much more deeply into this, but this has been enough for now. You've helped Ross to start the conversation, and we'll take it from here, and really appreciate your courage, my friend, and your clarity in the way you've articulated the new frontier of UAP disclosure. You've done an extraordinary service on behalf of all of us in taking the conversation forward, so we appreciate it.
Well, you're more than welcome, and I appreciate the company because it's a lonely space that I hope doesn't stay lonely for long. So I appreciate your fellowship here. Thank you.
Thank you. That was Jake Barber, and as Ross said earlier, one of the reasons why there's such confidence that there's zero doubt is because of people like Jake. And those of you who know his history know that he comes out of the U.S. military intelligence, special forces, and yet in the very act of retrieving UAP, he had experiences that changed his life and introduced him to psionics and the field of consciousness in a very, very powerful way. And it's the authenticity of stories like Jake's that I think gives all of us the confidence that the exploration that we're on is an exploration of great value and importance to the human community. We want to now just take a moment with Georg Bach, our technical director, and who's been the facilitator of all of our courses in our extraterrestrial studies program. It was Georg's idea to convene this psionic summit, and he has laid out some slides that he has been pondering as he himself seeks to understand the intricacies of this phenomenon. So Georg, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you share your slides.
Thank you, Jim. I'm very honored to be part of this summit here today. So what I've done is I've tried to create some visual charts you should be able to see right now to make some sense of this very complex situation here and to offer and provide some common vantage points to our discussion. So maybe it's worth our time to briefly look at these narrative frontiers in the disclosure conversation, because we have there at the very bottom these mystery drones, the acceptable narrative in the mainstream media, and also what we've heard in Congress. It's the most mainstream entry-level version of the phenomenon. Drones hovering over military installations on New Jersey, supposedly by foreign adversaries or FAA-approved testing. But then there is, a second layer to this UAP conversation, as we all know, like stuff that can't easily be brushed off. The Nimitz encounters, countless other sightings of military pilots where we have the 5 observables present, meaning basically that the motion of these crafts is so fast and doesn't adhere to our current understanding of physics, which means there must be some alternative propulsion present here on this planet. But in that narrative, it still remains unclear if we're talking extra-dimensional, extraterrestrial, or some secret program. That's where David Grush came in, and he explicitly talked about the recovery of biologics and non-human craft, which was a big deal, I believe. Elizondo, in the last hearing in November, then hinted at the notion that we have alien reproduction vehicles, meaning that we have not only recovered these crafts, but have back-engineered them and are flying around with them, as we have heard in rumors and by Greer for many, many days, many years before. But even that was too hot for most to handle. So what Barber introduces to this disclosure conversation is kind of a new front line, and I believe also a paradigm shift, because in order to accept his testimony, that of his teams, we need to shift a paradigm to a post-physical paradigm where NHI, craft, and beings interact with human consciousness. As a military practice, consciousness is used to retrieve UAPs. And this potentially shifts the disclosure conversation from demanding truth about NHI to research and experience its presence, ourselves and as psychonauts. So that's why I made these 3 circles here. I believe it's important to understand what is converging here. Imagine, if you will, 3 powerful cultural forces that have previously been unaware of each other. You can see them on the chart. Let's start with the disclosure movement. We have the political disclosure movement gaining momentum with the zero doubt regarding the reality of NHI presence, as Carnell stated it. But there is this ontological shock of this realization that NHI is omnipresent, and what this means to the human condition. And I believe it can only be truly processed by the human potential movement. And so it's really an irony of history, an unexpected turn of events to me, that places like Esalen Institute or Ubiquity University, where we are right now, all of a sudden find themselves at the front lines, not only of driving disclosure forward, but also readying the human spirit for it. As the famous philosopher Ken Wilber, one of the fathers of the human potential movement and our inaugural chancellor at Ubiquity, coined, we have to grow up, show up, clean up, and wake up to become fully human. And only then we are ready to reach out into the cosmos. And this reaching out is not an occult practice or purely intuitive. Right now, in this meeting of East, West, and NHI, it's becoming a science backed by decades of classified psi research in neuroscience technology that is now available for consumers or those who are interested for a few $100, like this Muse device. Like devices like this, they can measure your brain waves while you meditate or have a remote viewing session. And there are also other devices that can stimulate your brain waves to help you with remote viewing sessions or psi activity. And Birdie, who we will hear from later, she has a class at Ubiquity actually later next month, where we will look at exactly into that. We will examine how you can chart your brain waves for better remote viewing results. So it's an unprecedented moment where these powerful cultural forces are meeting and synergizing. And I believe this has the potential to create a critical mass for the UAP subject to become fully integrated to the cultural creative conversation, kind of the progressive culture of the human potential movement in Silicon Valley. Imagine people summoning or vectoring in UAPs at the next Burning Man. Wouldn't that be a project? Now, the final slide, I want to just briefly talk about what is it about this universe that makes it possible to communicate with NHI, right? I mean, it's a big question. Is there a kind of a medium that we communicate in? Jake mentioned this cosmic internet. But what is it really about? Is it consciousness itself? Is it the Akashic record? You know, the famous, one of the famous founding fathers of quantum physics, Erwin Schrödinger, he stated once that consciousness is a singular, which the plural is unknown of. It may be unknown, but it's certainly undeniable. And this idea that we as human beings are these isolated point of view machines divorced from a living universe, it's really a pretty recent idea and rather anomalous Western concept. And the more science we do, the more obvious it becomes that modernity is actually a limited hangout. But in the past, these visionary abilities were often reserved for an elite, you know, of medicine men, seers, or monks. But this new epoch promises to democratize the further reaches of human development and cosmic awareness through psionics. It's an elitism that everybody is invited to. You may not become a psionic virtuoso, but if you do the training, you will gain what I would call psi literacy, and eventually not only be able to read the notes, but to start hearing the music. If you get my Oppenheimer quote. It's a movie quote from the movie Oppenheimer. And that kind of helps us to segue to the topic of physics, like the upper thing there, extended physics. Big deal. We will later discuss today how fringe, or should we rather say classified physics, is deeply involved and aware of the psi phenomenon. It has become clear that remote viewing and the UFO secrecy deep state efforts are in fact the same program. So we, human beings, are exotic technology ripe for disclosure, more ubiquitous than whatever is being kept from us in those hangars in Area 51. Psionics makes disclosure personal and is about the discovery of who we really are in the cosmic scale of things. And with that, Jim, let's return to Washington to see where you are.
Thank you, Georg. I love this notion of human beings being exotic technology. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And thank you for the way you've parsed these different dimensions of psionics, because I think it's very true that the human potential movement, disclosure, and the technology of consciousness are now coming together in a very, very potentiated and powerful way. So thank you. Thank you very much. Georg will circle back later to dialogue with a couple of our physicists. We want to now turn to Pippa Malmgren, who is in New Delhi, as it turns out. You all know Pippa Malmgren. She's an analyst, an author, an advisor to corporations and senior levels of the US government. She travels incessantly. So we find her in India tonight, and it's way past midnight. So we thought we'd get her on earlier in the program. So Pippa, thank you for joining us. Thank you for staying up late. Just share with us your perception of what Ross or Jake or Georg has said. What do you think psionics is comprised of?
Thank you so much, Jim, for inviting me on. And apologies, my voice is slightly raspy tonight. So I came into this subject very late, only a few years ago, during lockdown. when a number of people that I knew from my time in the White House said, you need to look at this. And initially I was like, this is ridiculous. I was highly dismissive, but I did begin to look at it, and I could see that the American Congress was putting into place quite substantial legislation. And I realized there's no way that that's going to be happening unless there's something quite serious going on. And from there, I've been digging deeper into this subject. So let me jump forward to what's just been said, because I think one of the key elements of this subject is that it's very rooted in a particular way of thinking because it got caught up in the Cold War, because whatever this phenomena is gravitates to nuclear events, nuclear phenomena. So during the Cold War, obviously, the most secret, highly classified subject matter had to do with atomic energy. And the fact that the phenomena seems to gravitate to it, quite literally, physically, it shows up overhead. You mentioned the drones, for example, that we've been experiencing in recent months. And there's been a big effort to say it's only in New Jersey. It's a very specific localized phenomena, but in fact, it's not. It's occurring all over the United States, but all over the world. And interestingly, whatever it is showing up over nuclear facilities. But of course, you don't want to be advertising that this is the case because it's terrifying to the defense establishment that the location of nuclear material should be revealed. And so there's been a huge effort over many decades to sideline and suppress the subject because of national security reasons. But fast forward to today, I think what Jake has said is so critical. And so let me point out a deep irony. I think that when you create a highly lethal force of highly patriotic people, we call them special ops, people who work in the special ops field, and you ask them to interface with whatever this phenomena is, what no one imagined or expected is that that group of people who have quite literally had their hearts hardened because, like Olympic snipers, you literally have to stop your heart from beating to be able to shoot the target that you're aiming at. So emotionally turned off that no one expected this is the group of people that would have their hearts touched most profoundly by their contact with the phenomena. But that seems to be what is happening. And it makes sense as well because in the comments that have just been made, there's a kind of a hint that this has to do with sensory perception. Of course, special ops guys, they can hear a twig snap from like a mile away. They are highly sensitive to their environment. Their sensory perception is extremely elevated. So it makes sense that they have the capacity to perceive. They are being put into direct contact with the phenomena. Of course, usually not being told that this is the case. And now enough of them are interconnecting and speaking to each other and coming forward with a view that actually this Cold War approach of pretend it's not there, deny that it's there, is no longer serving. And so they're coming forward to talk about it as materially important. And I think it's connected to a larger phenomena, which is, I think we have to remember that in the West, meaning in the United States and Western Europe, we had a Cartesian revolution. That means when Rene Descartes came along in the 17th century, he said, let's split apart the scientific from the mysterious. the things we can quantify and test, from the things that are just feelings, that are just beliefs. We leave science to the realm of scientific discovery, and we leave beliefs and feelings to the realm of religion. And because we made this split, it became necessary to verify all phenomena through scientific testing. But it does seem that this phenomena we're discussing is so sophisticated, and I'm struck by Yuval Harari's reference to it, where he says artificial intelligence is an alien, that we are building and devising systems that are behaving in ways that are quite alien to humans. And so, and Georg, you made a reference to AI in your talk. I think that this is where things are happening, in the sense that there's a beginning to be a recognition that actually this Cartesian split may no longer be serving us very well. And so what we have now is scientism, which is anybody who says this is ridiculous and refuses to bring our best science to the subject, versus science, which says we now have extraordinary scientific discovery capabilities. We have extraordinary telescopes, we have extraordinary microscopes. Our capacity to comprehend what's happening in reality has been so substantially advanced that we're beginning to think holistically again, instead of separating apart the mystical from the scientific. And I would point out that Russia and China never separated these things. This is a particularly Western phenomenon. Demand that science answers the question. The rest of the world doesn't have this constraint. And so I think part of what's driving what we're talking about is the fear that Russia and China are going to announce a catastrophic disclosure where they say it first, and we are left behind in the West because we can't bring ourselves to address the various aspects of the phenomena that Ross talked about, that Jake talked about. So I'll finish by saying, I think I love this quote from William Butler Yeats, where he says, "The world is full of magic things or magical things waiting for our senses to grow stronger to perceive them." And they are growing stronger, and our scientific capacity to recognize them is growing stronger. And this includes this element of consciousness. So I'm extremely interested in this also because within the UAP subject, there are a number of taboo subjects. So you take a taboo subject and you create sub-taboos, and one of them is consciousness. We know very little about consciousness. We've brought so little science to this subject. We have brought some, but not very much. And now we live in the era of quantum physics, quantum discoveries, a recognition that the way the universe works is not what we had understood. So I think this is a very beautiful moment in the history of humankind. And I suspect that what we're going to find is that our own conscious understanding of how things work is going to be much improved by bringing an open mind and our best scientific capabilities to the study of this subject. So that's where I am as somebody who's involved in technology. And I see the boundaries of technology and science expanding exponentially day by day. And this is one of the areas that's affected by that.
Thank you, Pippa, very much. I love your observation of the irony that it's the toughest of the tough that are having these experiences. And, you know, with the interview that Ross had with Jake, as we all know, Jake starts to cry at just the feeling of this being that was feminine and maternal and compassionate and loving, and in which he was completely enveloped. And when it comes from a guy like Jake Barber, you know, that's about all you need to hear to realize that there's zero doubt, ladies and gentlemen.
Actually, could I just say one thing on that
Sure.
that I think is really important, which is, why do we send in special ops people to deal with the phenomena. It's because from a military lens, that makes sense. You're sending in your most highly trained, most trusted professionals. But I think that there may be something to the idea that Friedrich Nietzsche put forward, which is that you stare into the abyss and the abyss stares back at you. This idea that it's a mirror. And so one of the problems we have is that people from a special forces background are trained to be prepared for a fight. They're trained to say it's my airspace and something else is in it. And therefore, they get their combative mentality often causes them to have extremely negative experiences with the phenomena. Whereas I've spent quite a lot of time with indigenous people around the world. And their view is like, obviously, what, you guys don't see this? Like it's you can see it everywhere around you all the time. But because they don't bring a combative mentality, they're not territorial, they are not treating it as a dangerous thing that must be controlled and contained. They have very beautiful experiences with the phenomena. And so I think for me, when I've met the special forces experts on this, and I've asked them, since you saw that UAP in the sky, have you had any weird, mystical, interesting experiences happen to you? And they always say the same thing. No one ever asked me this, but yes, lots of, basically my heart has been touched by the
Exactly.
phenomenon. And so I think we need to explore more deeply what is the attitude that we bring to our study of it, our contact, whatever that is with it, and who is having that contact, and how have they been conditioned to view it as either a hostile thing or something which is part of nature. These are very different ways of understanding the phenomena.
Thank you, Pippa. That point is going to be a major issue that we're going to discuss later on in the program. How does humanity now interpret this phenomenon? And do we treat it as a national security issue or as a matter of open-heartedness and collegiality? So thank you so much. And before we move on, I just want to acknowledge the passing of your father.
Thank you.
Everyone so loved and respected him, and I just wanted to acknowledge that because it was the passing of a great man, and you now have to carry the torch forward. So thank you.
So kind of you. It's like what Ross said. It's just once you get involved in the subject, it's amazing how it's like a lasso that pulls you to places you didn't expect. And when I told my father that I was beginning to really study this subject, it never occurred to me that it would turn out that he'd been involved in it from his early days as an advisor to John F. Kennedy,
Absolutely.
working on the Cuban Missile Crisis. So it's extraordinary what you find when you start exploring this subject.
Thank you, Pippa. Thank you so, so much. We want to now turn to Richard Dolan. And it's always good as we approach something that we think is completely new to remind ourselves that it has a history and that it has a tradition. And no one understands the history of UFOs, UAP, more deeply than Richard Dolan. So I want to thank you, Richard, for everything you've done on behalf of all of us to just chronicle this odyssey of humanity since the dawn of the atomic age. And I know you've got a whole new trilogy coming out on unidentified submerged objects, but for this program, just share with us, as you would like, the history of psionics.
Yeah, hi, Jim, and greetings to everyone. I just want to give a quick little shout out to Dr. Pippa Malmgren. I had no idea she was going to quote two of my favorite dead Europeans, Nietzsche and Yeats. It was nice to hear. I also enjoyed Georg's graphics and his presentation as well. It's very interesting, and it was great to hear Jake Barber talk. I'm no expert in psionics. There's no way I would pretend that I have deep knowledge about this. I like to say, and it's true, that I'm married to a really good remote viewer, Tracy, and I'm lucky that I'm friends with Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, two of the people who created the remote viewing program at SRI, and I've met a lot of remote viewers in my career and in my life. So I don't have any obstacles in terms of believing that what these people do is real. That is, the ability to perceive things in ways that we would ordinarily consider non-conventional, right, beyond our standard five senses, that there is something there. And it's also, I would suggest it's probably evident that we don't yet have a proper scientific understanding of how that works. So it's important that we continue to explore the different modalities and methods by which we can do these perceptions and to test them to the best of our ability. And also, I would just say, this is maybe an acknowledgement of a skeptical point of view, that we should not be surprised when skeptics still want better evidence or even something like proof to demonstrate that these capabilities are real. I personally think that there is very strong evidence to that, but it's incumbent upon those of us who are interested in this to do the very best we can to provide that, because otherwise, it's one thing to experience something yourself, but if someone out there has not experienced it, and if they don't have the psychic gift that Jake Barber was talking about, which is totally possible, right? We don't all have the same level. We should always do the very best that we can to try to understand this scientifically and to conduct reasonable, good experiments to that effect. And having said all of that, I think it's great to dive into this fascinating topic of alleged, or let us say, possible ET communication and human telepathic abilities, because if we're really going to talk about the history of psionics, I think that's really what we're getting into. The history of our alleged and maybe possible and maybe real communications from other beings. I don't think it's as far-fetched as some skeptics would like to think at first glance. I mean, if you consider that an advanced civilization would have technological capabilities beyond our own, that alone would be enough perhaps to explain how they might be able to have a kind of brain-to-brain communication. There's technology that would exist. We know the United States military for years, decades, has worked on all types of psychological weaponry that would affect people's emotional capabilities, cognitive capabilities, and so forth. Is it really that difficult to think? I mean, my God, there were experiments back in the 1950s and 60s about thinking of people like Jose Delgado of Yale University and others who had these attempts to kind of mind control over the brain. So this goes back a long way. It's not really that much of a reach to think that we could have this type of communication. And in fact, researchers in the UFO field have been suggesting this for decades. Even back in the 60s and 70s, you had people pointing out that the UFO phenomenon seemed to go beyond our conventional understanding of science. We hear phrases like high strangeness coming in. You fast forward to today, where you have concepts in physics like quantum entanglement and non-locality. And we heard Ross earlier today talking about the microtubules. All of these, I think, are very interesting, and they very likely can align with some of these ideas about telepathic communication. Now, in the history of ufology, or our interaction with these other intelligences, there are a number of cases, some of them very well known and not really discussed enough, that actually suggest this. And I could go back to the very early Betty and Barney Hill case of 1961. We may have forgotten, but in that incident, this is way back there, over 60 years, Barney Hill reported, he said, "The eyes are talking to me." Very much suggesting, I've always thought, a telepathic communication with the aliens. What he said was the beings communicated with him through their eyes, telling him, "Don't be afraid." And it's one of the earliest cases where you could argue that there's a kind of telepathic communication going on between us and them. Not the first, there are other even earlier alleged ones, but it was an influential one. You've got the a bit more tendentious and controversial claim of Jim Penniston from the Rendlesham Forest in 1980. Still very interesting. And according to that one, Penniston stated, he was one of the first two U.S. Air Force soldiers on the site at Rendlesham in the forest in 1980. He said he had a close encounter with a triangular craft in the forest, and that during that encounter, he experienced a form of telepathic communication or an information transfer from the craft. Specifically, he stated that when he touched the craft, he got some kind of binary code, which he wrote down at some point later, was transcribed into his notebook a long time later, actually. But and this is what makes it a little bit difficult. If we weren't there, and yet Penniston's account, some have suggested it's evolved a little over time. The binary code aspect of his story did not come out immediately, and that has always been a problem, including for me. I'm wondering, like, why didn't you discuss this earlier? Nonetheless, I'm not inclined to say that he's not telling the truth, and it is an interesting potential there. I think even more interesting, though, is the research of John Mack, who, especially during the 1990s when he was most active, he found that many of his abductee subjects reported telepathic communication as the primary mode of interaction with aliens. So his work, but all of it led him to believe that the phenomenon is real, because there was so much consistency with what he was obtaining through these individuals. And Mack, of course, added that it often involved profound personal or spiritual transformations. But the telepathic communication aspect of it was very, very prominent. And in fact, it involved a lot of complex information and imagery. And he had a few examples, and I wrote a couple of them down here so I wouldn't forget. One was Julie. This is one of his early cases. A woman named Julie said she had powerful messages about the human threat to Earth's environment and ecology. They were very vivid. They were conveyed in images and unmistakable words, she said, through kind of telepathic communication. There was someone named Sheila, another early one. She said she had experiences full of electricity that involved telepathic communication. An artist named Edward Carlos, listed in the books, he described a wide range of light phenomena associated with his encounters, which often, not always, but often involved telepathic communication. And a number of others that John Mack had. One named Abby, she said she glimpsed the aliens, gave her the kind of creative potential that human beings had. This was communicated to her apparently telepathically. And Mack also said that many of the abductees he worked with reported getting this type of information through either direct telepathic communication or eye-to-eye contact with the beings. So I thought, that's kind of interesting. There's a lot of information transfer that he discussed in many of these. In fact, one of them, I can't remember the name of this one, but described receiving information stored in these strange spheres or balls of light, like orbs, which were communicated to that person telepathically. So there's a lot going on in Mack's research, which I personally have always found very interesting, and I would just say persuasive. I would go that far, I think. It's not the same as saying this is absolute scientific proof that we've got this is real. But I do think a reasonable mind would want to take this seriously and look at it and not just dismiss it. Then you have, the pretty well-known, very well-known Ariel school incident from Zimbabwe from 1994. And here you have a number of school children. They're all adults now. They've all grown up. And they still maintain this, by the way, but they reported receiving telepathic messages, also focusing on environmental concerns from the ETs or aliens, let's just say, that they encountered. Tracy and I were very good friends with one of these individuals who recently sadly passed away, Emily Trem, who was one of these kids, and for the rest of her life continued to discuss this. But this idea about environmental messages is a very consistent one that people have claimed to have gotten. And these kids at the aerial school did explicitly state they got it through kind of telepathic means. And then there's a few others that are maybe less well known, but I really think are worth potentially at least, following up on. One is Dan Sherman. Dan Sherman wrote a book called Above Black. I've always been fascinated by this man, and I've read his book several times. I just think he is another one that you really want to take seriously. So Sherman claimed he was trained by the U.S. military to engage in very strict telepathic communications with very strict protocols with non-human intelligences. So there's that. I mean, you have the problem with a lot of this, at least my own problem, if I could say that, is that there are many, many ongoing contactee claims about this type of communication, ongoing telepathic communications with ETs. Not saying they're not true, but some of them are not always presented in the best way that's going to inspire confidence from outsiders, non-believers, and skeptics. And that's just the reality. So those of us who believe in this, and I'm one of those people, I just think we have to be careful about being in a bubble so that we just assume that, oh yes, everyone is on board with this. The other thing that I would always caution against, and this is just the black pill side of me coming through over and over, I can't shake it, but I do think that while there are some great potentials in kind of, let's say, telepathic communication with NHI, I don't think it's a given that everyone out there is going to want to be our friend, or that everyone out there is here to help us in one way or another. Jim mentioned at the beginning of this, I did just write a 3-volume history of USOs. First volume is published. The other 2 are coming out in the next couple of months. But what I saw in those is simply a large number of what you can only describe as confrontations at sea between various militaries, prominently the United States military, but also others, with these objects. And that's not to say that we're the good guys and they're the bad guys, or vice versa. Who's to say? But there are confrontations that go on, seems to me, and there are reasons to wonder, are they all here just to, bring love and light? I would not want to go there, and I don't think that that's actually a wise policy anyway. I would want to be a lot more. I would not want to make a firm conclusion that they are all here to help us. And I think we still have a lot of questions to ask about this. When I look over, I've studied this phenomenon now for 30 years, and a couple of things I could say very confidently. I'm very confident that there is a phenomenon that's here that strongly appears not to be from our civilization. That there's a confrontational aspect to it, yes. That there's been lying from the United States government predominantly about this for a long time. Why should we be surprised that the U.S. government lies about anything, honestly? You've got all of these skeptical rationalists out there who are willing to accuse the U.S. government of lying about all these things, except when it comes to UFOs. And I'm like, can we maybe find some consistency here, because they lie about that too. So there's a reality, there's deception, there is secrecy. There has been 80 plus years of leaks of interesting things going on in terms of technology, bodies. This didn't just start with David Grush. This goes way back. At the same time, we have a sufficient number of declassified documents that prove that there's something going on here that does not align with the official statements we've been given. So all of that, I don't think you can argue with. Where we get into more difficulty is in figuring out what's the conclusion. How do we conclude what these things are, where they're from, and what their motives are? I have my own theories. I've talked about them many times. We'll bypass that this time. But I do think that they are ultimately deeply engaged in this planet. They're engaged in us. They know that we've gone through a rapid transformation technologically. over the last couple of centuries, which is not a long period of time in the long scheme of things. So they're watching us. And now we're watching them at the same time. So there's a little dance going on here. And to me, that's the most fascinating aspect of this. It's the us and them part of it, the back and forth that I think, you know, when you study the history of their interaction with us, you can see adaptations happening. You can see things are changing, and it's not a static situation. So, but back to the thing, I'm just going to wrap this up here. Back to psionics and the history of that. I don't think there's any question that what we talk about as consciousness is a critically important part of this. I started out years ago, not quite dismissive of it, but certainly not focusing on it at all. I was totally nuts and bolts, wanted to get the facts, wanted to look at all of that. But there is this very subjective and deeply personal aspect of our encounters with these beings, craft, that is very important. And we would be foolish to ignore it because it's, I think, you know, Ross was saying earlier that it's, to him, it's the most central part of this phenomenon. Quite possibly, yes. But we still really want to do our very best to, we need to document this as well as we can. We need to present the data in as scientifically responsible way as we can. Otherwise, we're not doing anyone else any favors either. So it's important to continue pursuing this and to be as careful and critical as we can. So I guess I'll just leave it there. Thanks for giving me this time. It's been a pleasure to be part of this very excellent panel.
Thank you, Richard, and your admonitions are very well taken. This is a very complex phenomenon, this process of disclosure. And psionics is emerging, but it's linked inseparably with all the other aspects. And you're so right, there are forces that are resisting. There are people who are highly skeptical. So we need to proceed with boldness, but with both feet very solidly on the ground. So thank you for that. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
We want to turn now, everyone, to 4 people who have had very deep experiences with these beings, because that is a very important dimension of psionics. It's not just simply technology and special op soldiers going through a certain discipline in a rigorously militarized and technologized way. But there have been thousands of human beings around the world over the last 80 years that we know of, and obviously much before that, and among peoples like the indigenous peoples who've been doing it for some time. But for we Westerners, it's a relatively new phenomenon. So we want to hear now from several people who've actually been doing this in a very deep, and I would say consciously intimate way with these beings. So I want to invite first Bertie Jaworski, who I mentioned before. She's been doing remote viewing for over 30 years. She has developed a highly innovative, world-class technique for remote viewing called transdimensional mapping. I mentioned at the beginning, she is our principal partner in our extraterrestrial studies program. She's delivered a number of courses, both in remote viewing and in other dimensions of psionics. She has a number of courses coming up that you can access on our website at ubiquityuniversity.org or transdimensionalmapping.com. Bertie, give us your take from a personal point of view, an experiential point of view of what is psionics and who are these beings that you're encountering?
Thanks, Jim. I'm so glad to be here today. We are all psionics assets. Every single person who is listening and watching this program, and every single person on this entire planet is a psionics asset. Psionics is not just for special forces or special operations. Psionics is not for people with special equipment, even people with special training, though that may help. Psionics is simply this natural ability that every single human being holds within themselves. If you just think about it, we all have those moments in our daily life where we just know something. You just have a feeling that there's something wrong. And then you find out that a friend of yours had something terrible happen, or you think about your grandmother and then you find out that she's just passed away, or you feel someone is watching you as you're walking down the street and you turn around and sure enough, someone is staring at you. We all have these moments. We are all psionics, every single one of us. And we can develop this ability. We can work on it and strengthen it. Psionics is just kind of another word for this whole field of consciousness that we all exist within. We can get information from the past, the present, and the future. We all experience this every single day of our lives. If you think about all those different times that you had a premonition about something, or you thought about someone, and then they called you on the phone. So this isn't something that is special or that is only for certain kinds of people. It is something that is intrinsic to every single one of us, every single one of us. And as a remote viewer of 30 years, I have experienced all kinds of interesting things, the past, all kinds of interesting things in our deep history, our ancient history, our present. I've even looked at the future many, many times. I've done over 10,000 remote viewing sessions, more like 15 to 20,000 in the 30 years that I've been doing this. And I have come to this deep understanding that every single one of us has this ability and is able to transcend time and space and to have this consciousness interaction with each other, with the world around us, and with our universe, which is absolutely teeming with life. One of the things that I teach in remote viewing is this whole idea that we can communicate with things outside of our own human family. We can communicate with animals, and we all have experienced this where you kind of know what your dog is thinking, or your cat, or your horse, or your parrot. We all have these moments. And just like we know what our dog is thinking, we can also, in remote viewing, know what an ET is thinking, or a non-human intelligence that isn't necessarily a physical being is thinking. Remote viewers, going back to the original Stargate program and the government Stargate program in the military, all of them have said that you can tell what anyone is thinking when you're remote viewing. And sure enough, that's part of the traditional method of remote viewing. You're taught how to find out what an individual's thoughts are. And it makes sense to me that you could then extrapolate from that and find out what a non-human intelligence is thinking. And because many of these beings, like humans, we're telepathic on some level. We maybe are not completely in tune with our own abilities. We're learning how to become more in tune with them. But if you consider beings that may be way more advanced, maybe millions of years more advanced than us, or maybe they are beings that are pure consciousness in some way, these beings may be telepathic or able to communicate. And many remote viewers going back over 30 years into the Stargate program have reported getting messages from extraterrestrials, from non-human intelligence. And if you get a message, you can send a message. We have that ability too. And so that's one of the things that I do teach in my classes is how to have a constructive conversation. Now, it's important to think about this whole phenomenon in a really unique way. We tend to anthropomorphize everything. We tend to put a human face on everything. We tend to classify even the encounters that people have reported over all of these years, going way back through human history. We tend to categorize them as good or bad. It's a good non-human intelligence. This is a bad non-human intelligence. But I'd like to invite everyone to think about this a little bit differently. Many of these non-human intelligences have their own ideas about the world around them, about their own universe and about us. And maybe the way that they interact with us, their ideas about us may be negative, or they may look at us as being a fractured species. We have many wars going along. We are resource hoarding all the time. We are constantly at odds with each other. And so we kind of have to flip it on its head and not necessarily think about things in a very anthropomorphic way. And I've looked at, this is one thing I've extensively done, especially over the past 8 years, is look at non-human intelligence from their perspective. And it is completely eye-opening to realize that they don't see us the way that we see ourselves. They see us as a part of this planet, or some of them do at least, as a part of this planet, just as a tree or a rock is a part of this planet, just as a horse or a dog is a part of this planet. They see us connected to this sphere at this time, but they also see us as potentially being individuals or a society that is about to embark in new directions, whether it's through artificial intelligence, whether it's through spacefaring. They're looking at us being at this crossroads right now, and they're reaching out. I think that the drones are a part of what's happening. They're reaching out to us, trying to get us to notice them. I think that many people who are doing things like going out into the wilderness and doing meditations to call in the orbs or the ships or what have you, just like what Ross was describing at Esalen, where they were able to vector in some kind of a craft. They're waiting for us. They are waiting for us to wake up and to realize that we have this deep innate potential. We are able to reach out just as they are reaching out to us. So I think that it's super important for all of humanity to start seeing ourselves as being more than just a simple brain in a body. We exist in this whole field of consciousness, and we can access any place, any time. We can have conversations, real conversations with intelligences that are outside of our own familiar realm of existence. And those conversations can be incredibly enlightening. Oftentimes, if you do have a communication with a non-human intelligence, they'll kind of dumb it down for you, because we're not at that point where we understand everything that they understand. They may be way far advanced on a physical or mental or even spiritual level compared to us. So they may tell things to you in a very simplistic way. But the more that you interact with non-human intelligence, the more your mind opens and you're able to understand even more complex things than you were before. So it's an absolutely incredible, incredible journey. And many of my students are now having these kinds of conversations going forward, trying to reach out and understand their place in this universe, to understand who else is out there reaching out to them. And I'm just really excited to be a part of this. And I'm very, very honored, to be a part of this discussion today. and excited that Jake Barber has started talking about this, and it's opening this up into the world at large so that we can have this conversation and understand that we can absolutely use our being. And I hate to use even the word our mind, because, you know, that's a word that, what does that even mean? I don't believe that what we're doing is necessarily stuck, you know, inside of our skull. I think that our awareness is expansive and we're able to just completely fly free and to understand so much more about the world around us. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Bertie. It's so good to talk with someone like you who've had this deep experience. I mean, one of the things I learned from you that you have ET friends. You have ETs that you've been in conversation and friendship with for many years. So that's a possibility that I hope that all of us will avail ourselves to.
Absolutely. Every single person can meet all kinds of interesting species and, you know, groups and collectives. It's a rich, rich, rich universe. I've conversed with beings way outside of our galaxy and beings that live here with us that are always present around us that we don't necessarily notice. And it's an adventure.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Bertie's a wonderful partner, everyone, and her trans-dimensional mapping is really state of the art. I've taken the class, and it was through that first class that I had my first ET encounter. So it was a historic milestone for me personally. And so I really want to acknowledge you, Bertie, and thank you for all that you've done.
Thank you, Jim.
We want to now turn to Chris Bledsoe. Chris, you all know, Chris has been an experiencer for many years. He wrote a best-selling book, UFOs and God. He's had very intimate encounters with these beings and with orbs. So Chris, who's coming in from North Carolina, Chris, thank you for joining us. And just take a few minutes, Chris, and just share your own personal experience of the psionics domain and how you've communicated and harmonized, I would say, your own personal lives with these beings, and in particular, the lady.
Well, thank you for having me, Jim. It's an honor. And what I want to do is give you a view from how I got here. It's 18 years ago, this past January, is when I found out that this thing was very much spiritual. And I went about telling that. I reported it, and I got laughed out of basically the UFO world. They thought it was just too much for them. But I've been a proponent for 18 years, and I'm going to say why. And all these little things I'm going to say is important for you to understand the nature of this thing and how I react with it or interact with it. And it gets past this point of seeking. Once you make the connection, it's always there. And one thing I'll add, a friend of mine, reminded me to talk and start sharing about what we did on the History Channel in 2023 when they aired Beyond Skinwalker. And this is coming from people within the government. We actually, on camera, with scientists on site and 15 other witnesses, with a brain scan on my head, was able to film that telepathic or that emotional interaction live on TV, well, in front of everybody, with the scientific equipment. So in the first time in history, we made contact observable with scientists, PhDs there, and the scientific data we have. So we have established that that contact is happened already, and that it was emotional based. This is the most important part for me, about connecting to this psionics. This is a new word for me. And how I got thrust into it was, everybody knows, has read my book or has listened to me talk over these years, that I went through a lot of trouble, a lot of heartache, a lot of stress, and all kinds of things, gunshots so with that said, this all ties into the emotions thing. We know through science and through studying with Monroe Institute that it's emotional based. It's not something that you go out and you just mindlessly try to summon something of. It's like summoning a mindless creature. It's not like that. You have to have this emotional connection, and it extends through 18 years of data. It always, these people that have these experiences usually have a near death or severe trauma. So there's another tie-in to emotion. And then I might ask, why would an alien care about emotion? So I've gone through these for 18 years. I'm not going to label this. A lot of people say I see it through a religious lens. I'm not religious. I'm very spiritual. But I can tell you, it answers, for me, it answers prayer. It doesn't answer some summoning, meditating technique. It just, when I say a prayer, it comes. But I think that is probably a little bit easier for me in a way, because one thing I'll say about this case is I was taken in broad daylight. It wasn't through meditation or regression or a dream that all this happened to me. I walked up the hill at 10 after 5, and there were these balls of fire in the sky. The sun was just below the trees, but the sky was blue. So I was taken in the daylight, conscious in the daylight. And with that said, I could never get around, I could never be skeptical, because that word skeptical, if you're seeking this and you're skeptical, you'll probably not ever find it. You got to get rid of that skepticism and just open yourself up and seek, and it'll come. But it's emotion based. For me, it is, and it always reacts. Now is such a strong connection that I walked out. I didn't go out last night because it was raining, but the night before, I took my little camera out. And I thought, well, I'm just going to film Orion, because this is how it works. I can pick a spot in the sky, the moon, for example, and say I want to film the moon, and I'm going to film these orbs flying by the moon or by Orion, because I'm asking them to do that. And so night before last, I had probably 25, 30 videos of orbs appearing in the constellation or flying through. Some of them were changing directions. Some of them you could barely see them. And then they brightened up and they would answer me when I asked them questions. But I don't have to seek it anymore, because I know it's real. And once you know it's real and you don't have that skepticism anymore, it becomes a relationship. So now I walk outside and I look up and they start flashing me. I haven't even thought about meditating or any of that. It's like a family now. They come, and when I walk out, they come. Or sometimes I have to ask and they do come. And it'll be as many as 100 or more. And that's how strong it's gotten. But it wasn't always that way. It's I'm a lot like Jake, in that above us is an information field where everything that's ever been said, ever been done, is still there. It's like saved in the space above us. And if you're paying attention, like Bertie said, you can start seeing this psychic information. It starts coming, like your wife calling, and you know it before she calls. Well, it gets a whole lot more deeper than that, and that you can start purposely looking for that information, which is remote viewing. And I've been doing that a long time. It's not my favorite thing to do, but we can all do it. But without tying this thing up a whole lot more, I've kind of give you an idea of how it works for me. I don't want to say it's good, it's bad, it's alien, or it's angel. I would tell you in my thoughts, it's the latter. It's in the angelic world because it cares about us. And there may be lots of stuff out there, but my swim lane is balls of light, orbs. And the Bible is full of those. All you have to do is look. So we're just rediscovering what our friends 2,000 years ago were writing about. We kind of pushed it out, but it's back in our face, and it knows your thoughts. It knows what you're thinking. It knows if you're afraid. If you're afraid and you want to see it, it won't come because it don't want to harm your free will. That's my experience. I can teach anybody to do this once I show it to you. Once you see it, then it becomes this truth switch. It's what somebody at NASA explained to me. Why people that get around me, it follows them home. And the reason for that is if somebody comes to my house and they see this with me, they're like, oh my God, it's real. Well, then when they go home, it's already met them. So if you go out and you look, it's going to come. And that is the best way I can describe this word they like to say, hitchhiker. It's just being awakened. And if you're skeptical, you're only harming yourself. It's good to be skeptical, right? But if you let that dominate your thought process, especially if you come to my house and you want to see this, if you had that mentality, good luck. It's really based between you and the phenomenon. It's not about the world. It's an individual awakening, one person at the time. And this is simply can get that by going out and looking. Get rid of the skepticism, turn it to an emotion thing where you care for your friends and your family, your pets. You have a love for them. You don't want to hurt anything. I didn't used to be that way. But after having this experience, it's my whole life now. I just don't want to harm anything. So it's a change. And everybody I've ever heard that has these experiences, there's a few that have scary ones. But the rule of thumb is they always come back and say, well, it didn't eat me, and it really made me for the better. So there's not a lot of negative stuff out there. It's more a positive thing, a life-changing thing. And I hope this year I can share it with at least 5,000 people personally. That's what my plans are, because we're going to have a few events and do some work and be out in the desert some this year. But thank you for having me. And it's my pleasure. I'm honored to be a part. And if there's any way I can do any more, I'm always here. So, but thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very, very much. The depth of your experience, I think, speaks for itself. And I know we're pushing the time limit. Everyone will probably go beyond the 2 hours because we have several other presenters and we want a discussion. But Chris, I don't want to leave your presence without touching on the feminine aspects of your experience and your experience with who you call Our Lady.
Yeah.
To just take a minute or two just to describe that, because I think it's important for people to take in everyone, like with Bertie and like with Chris, the ones who've had the deep experiences, like Jake Barber,
Right.
are having these overwhelming experiences of compassion and a feminine presence. It's
Right.
interesting. So tell us a little bit about that.
What's really interesting, Jim, is I'm not Catholic, right? I was born and raised a Baptist, and so in the Protestant world, there's the lady is not prominent, right? It's not part of what I was taught all my life. So I guess I have to say I could be a good Catholic now based on having this experience. But was she the Virgin Mary? I don't know. I don't know. Uh, but I can tell you that that's the one thing that changed my life forever. And it changed the whole course of where I was heading and the phenomena. I was ready to quit. I was tired of the battling the community and the church and the family and then some of this organization I reported to, they were giving me a hard time, and so I was ready to quit. And when I was first taken 5 years before, I was like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where was it Richard Dreyfuss was making mashed potatoes on the table. My obsession was I got to tell the world. Well, the more I told it, the worse it got on me until I just said, why? And then one night, this very strong wind came, blew me over physically. And it's all in the book, but from that wind came the spirit. And believe it or not, the definition of spirit is the wind. And the definition of the Holy Spirit is the breath of God. So all this type of experience being taken when I was at the bottom of my life in 2007. Then I'm ready to quit after they made me want to tell the world. Then I felt beaten down again. And then the lady comes and she says, no, this is your burden you must bear. You got to tell what you know. And if you do, I will let you film us. I'll let you share our presence with others. And when the time's right, in the future, we're going to reveal our presence to the world in a bigger way. And that's exactly what's happening now. But this beautiful lady is, let's just say this, Jake is a friend of mine. He's a good guy. His children are beautiful. They're experiencing these orbs. He and I feel a lot the same about this thing. Without talking for him, he felt that presence too. I saw it. I didn't just feel it. I saw it. And it's still, I feel it. You know, when you have her in your life, she's always there. That's that emotion thing that I was talking about, and Jake taps into. You let that emotion come in until it just makes you want to weep. And then these lights, these orbs, my hair's standing up right now. Here they come. I would bet they're over my house right now based on what I'm feeling. But it's emotion's key. That's one of the keys. If we want to teach anybody how to connect, you got to, you can't do it summoning. I don't like that word because it makes the phenomenon sound like some mindless creature or thing that you can control. Well, it's not like that. These things know your thoughts. You can't fool them. You can't say something, but in your mind mean something else. That won't work because they know your thoughts. And but by opening your heart up and having that empathy for, you know, I can see a child like this week. This child, his mom writes me, he's 10 years old. He's dying from myocarditis. And when I see that, it overwhelms me. And I take that outside and I might hold this picture up of this child. And then the heavens tend to start coming alive. And it's responding to this emotion. Amazing. This is one real key to it. Without labeling it, I can really tell you the patterns and how it works and show you. But everybody's got to figure it out on their own, what you're dealing with. But It's just a beautiful thing to me.
Thank you so much, Chris. Just want to acknowledge everything you've been through
Yeah,
and
appreciate
everything that you've carried, brother.
Yeah.
And you're keeping on under the protection of Our Lady. So that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate you.
Now we want to turn back here to Washington, D.C. to Sarah Gamm, who, like Jake Barber, has come out of the intelligence community, the governmental sector, and has had some extraordinary adventures with the extraterrestrial beings. So Sarah, thank you so much for everything you've done. Most people know you already from your interview with Ross Coulthard and other podcasts, but just share with us your own experience of these beings and your own sense of what's comprised when we talk about psionics.
Yeah, thank you. First off, how do I follow all these amazing people? So I feel honored to be a part of all of this. Thank you, and thanks to everybody who's joined, because this is definitely an important part of we'll call it, we're history in making right now. So my experiences have been kind of all over the map. I mean, from just we'll start with the humans that have, been, I guess, a part of this, and um, it's not always welcome. It's not a welcome conversation. So the past few years, it is an open conversation now, and it feels so incredible to be a part of all the community and the journey that I've had. So it's an open conversation. And as if you have mentioned, the awakening happening. So it just takes one person to understand what we're talking about, and that neural network is going to expand. So I don't expect everybody to, drink my Kool-Aid that I'm speaking, but it might resonate with, and I'm hopeful that all of us here today have resonated with at least one person. So experiences, though, has been very various. So through, I think most people know, I am an astrophysicist, and I have a degree, a master's in countering weapons of mass destruction, and I'm a psychic medium. So I have a lot of various hats that I wear all the time, and it is very interesting to, have seen when I was supporting NGA, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. I was supporting the task force, the UAP task force, and I would see a video, and immediately something might look crazy. You pause it, you rewind, you go through like the Rolodex in your mind, and you're like, okay, that's not parallax, that's maneuvering, that's, making, very odd, quick movements that don't seem to be plausible for technology that we have today. So once I kind of get through that, all of the scientific, what this could be, it would be, oh, hi. And every once in a while, I'd see an image or a video, and um, this ended up, what I'm going to say ended up not making it into the film, The Program, James Fox's film. But I actually talked about how that first moment you see something, you just know it's not from here. And that gut and that intuition and that knowing would just wave at them and just be like, hey, welcome to Earth. Enjoy the visit. And, don't forget your towel. Sorry, nerd joke. So, it it was interesting being a part of the intel community and seeing people opening up to all of this. Like, once we would do a couple months of investigating and seeing that we couldn't come up with a plausible explanation, it was actually just unidentified. And so we made sure that unidentified didn't necessarily mean extraterrestrial or NHI, but we didn't know what it was. And so we would send, our report up to the food chain, and hopefully they did something good with it, right? And then, the psychic medium I didn't fully get through all my classes to be a psychic medium until after I left the task force. But I was still a part of everything, through side chats and through the collaboration space on the top secret system. And so I slowly started letting people know that I had these abilities. I was very scared at first that I was going to get fired. I was going to have my clearance pulled. I was going to have to, do a whole different poly or something, a polygraph. And turns out no one cared. And then, more questions would come up of the science behind all of this. And so I'm actually able to explain, some of the quantum. Well, I'm not a quantum physicist because that's a lot. But I understand. I've had to take some quantum when I was in college and can connect the dots and understand that everything is energy. So growing up, I would have these telepathic dreams of one of my relatives that had passed away. I didn't understand at the time that I didn't speak in these dreams, that it was just emotions and images that were passed through. And then over time, I realized like there's more out there to talk to. So over time, when I was doing the UAP task force stuff and then able to be open about my mediumship, I started having meditations with NHI visitors. And as my healing modalities, like Reiki, so I'm a Reiki master and other healing modalities that I'm attuned to, I started working with NHI. So they want love and light for this planet, and they want what's best for us. And so I started actually working with some of them, specifically Arcturians that come to me most often. And then one night I had a blue visitor, a blue being in my bedroom. So, and that was not an Arcturian. So I'm still trying to like figure out, I think he was from Sirius, or it was from Sirius A or B, but it was guarding me. And so I just knew, when I woke up in the morning, that whatever this journey was bringing, I am protected. And, Jake Barber has talked about how he is protected, and that's the same feeling that I have. The only rough part is, I still have a day job, and some people haven't been kind. And so I've had some, issues when I was at the Pentagon, and those have since been resolved. So I do have some protection on my side. But it's been an interesting journey from a mediumship aspect of, seeing some of the bad things. So as Chris mentioned earlier, I think it was Chris, I'm sorry if it might have been Chris and Birdie, that talked about that there are some negative things out there. And yes, there are, but we are still more powerful than them. And the good will typically prevail. They're a higher vibration. And so what the goodness that is out there truly wants what's best for our planet. And I totally get that some of the negative aspects, like, people that have been abducted, it is terrifying. And I get that. But I would say for the most part, like what Chris was talking about, it is about love, and it's that simple. So the more that people wake up, the more that, the planet will get back to a place that we started out a long, long time ago, many thousands years ago. I think that might be it.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. I just want to acknowledge the double dimension of your experience and mind between an astrophysicist and weapons of mass destruction and all of that on the one side, and mediumship and communing with NHI on the other side. That is the ultimate dichotomy that you bring together. So I just want to acknowledge that aspect of all this in our Western-dominated scientific reductionist world. We're holding deep contradictions. I think this is part of what Richard Dolan was saying earlier, that it's not a simple way forward. It's a very complex, highly complicated reality that we need to navigate through, and you hold many of those in your own psyche and self. So I just want to acknowledge that and thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it makes some days very interesting when I was working at ODNI at National Counterproliferation and Biosecurity Center, and I would be taking congressional taskers or having to brief Senate, and you're briefing on heavy topics that are really serious, and what you say will matter to our country and to our allies, and then to go home and provide a mediumship reading to a loved one and connect for them. It it feels neat to be in my seat and have these worlds combined, and to know like we're truly not alone ever, and angels and our loved ones are always around us. And I saw a comment earlier asking if loved ones are here, and yes, you think about them and they're with you. The love magnifies on the other side, including for pets. And so I had a pet pass away a few months ago, and he has been very present lately, and I don't know if I'm quite
Yes.
ready for that because I'm still grieving, but like he still wants to be around and probably pester the one Krypton that's still with us. So thank you. I appreciate acknowledging it, because some days it's definitely not easy to be working with, fighting terrorism on a daily basis at work and not understanding like why we even have war, because I have this broader perspective of why we're here.
Exactly. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All strength to you in your journey. And now, my friends, we want to turn to Sean Esbern Hargens, who is there at the Center for Human Sciences, and probably has the most sophisticated taxonomy of this whole phenomenon, of at least anyone I know about. That's one reason why I wanted to save him till nearly the end, because Sean, you've heard this whole discussion. What would you now add or modify or underscore about your understanding of psionics and what's really up for humanity as we enter into the field of consciousness?
No, great. Awesome. Thanks, Jim. And welcome to everyone able to join us today. Yeah, so by way of quick introduction, let me just say a little bit about my background as relevant to today's event. And then I'll briefly share a bit about psionics research I'm supporting or involved in, which will shine a light on what psionics is and really kind of echo and underscore pretty much everything that everyone's been sharing today. So I got my PhD in consciousness studies 20 years ago, and over the last 2 decades, I've specialized in a number of areas, all of which, as I reflect on it and think about the conversation today, they all feel pretty relevant to this discussion around psionics and what it is. So one area that I really focus on is adult psychological and emotional development and how people transform and integrate experiences. And in that context, I often am looking at noetic experiences, so mystical states of union and non-duality, as well as anomalous experiences, paranormal, psi phenomena, and so forth. And I tend to focus a lot on somatic and embodied awareness. And in that context, I'm really fascinated with our multiple subtle bodies and our inner senses and kind of the esoteric anatomy that really seems to be a big part of psionics and the link between consciousness and the phenomenon. And going way back, even way before my PhD, I've been very interested in animal and plant consciousness and what can we and can't we say about it. And I've been, particularly focused on the UAP topic and NHI encounters for quite some time. And, Jim was just kind of alluding to this. I've been kind of documenting and mapping the hundreds of types of varieties of non-human intelligences, as well as non-physical human intelligences reported by experiencers. And this is one of the things I'm hoping that we can expand our lexicon, because I think the focus on non-human intelligences, as amazing and important as those are, that tends to overshadow the wide variety of non-physical human intelligences we're also interacting with. So I think we have to expand at least to those two categories to better honor and acknowledge the wide range of human and non-human intelligences that we're working with and encountering in the kind of psionics context. So I've been exploring aspects of what we call psionics for, at least 30 years. I'm also a practitioner of various magical, esoteric, and meditative and contemplative traditions. I myself am an experiencer of a wide range of noetic and anomalous experiences, including encounters with NHI. And so much of my life's really been animated by the exploration of what is the nature of reality and how does consciousness, not just human consciousness, but like consciousness writ large or sentience, interface with that reality. So, today's panel and summit, this conversation's especially exciting to me as my experience of the UAP events and NHI encounters is that they're so saturated with consciousness. In fact, as has been noted here today, we can't really understand that without including consciousness, right? Every aspect of UAP events and NHI encounters involves consciousness, and we really need to weave in that element of the conversation. So alongside Jim and his team at Ubiquity, who have the ET Studies program, I also run a graduate program with a focus on the UAP topic. In fact, I believe these are the two only programs available currently. And so in this context at a graduate level, and it's my hope that summits like this can actually inspire other programs to pop up because we need a lot of engagement around all of this. So I run a graduate program in integral noetic sciences, which means my students study consciousness, especially noetic and anomalous experiences, using a mix of qualitative and quantitative research methods, right? So we have about 36 students currently, 12 masters, 24 doctoral students. And 6 months ago, I launched a UAP and consciousness studies concentration. And this has been a focus of students in the program even before that concentration got formalized. So the exploration of psionics is really at the heart of this program. And similar to Jim's program, we offer a variety of courses on remote viewing, exopsychology, UAPs, and so forth. And many of my students are experiencers and have psionic experiences, and we actively share and discuss those experiences in the classroom. So I wanted to showcase some of the kind of research topics and areas that the students in the program are focused on that relate to psionics. So they're looking at telepathic contact with a variety of NHI on and off planet, as well as in different dimensions. They're exploring noetic and anomalous modes of consciousness and perception, all the different ways that we can make contact. And then they're exploring different contact modalities, dreams, waking state contact, psychedelics, out-of-body experiences, the use of sound, the use of meditation. So we're always kind of looking at the wide range of contact modalities that enable psionics to occur. And they're experimenting with a variety of CE5 protocols and human-initiated contact experiences, and even developing new ones, and developing frameworks and protocols for contact and communication with NHI and the phenomena in general, as well as developing educational methods to train others in these protocols. And all of them are using integral or transdisciplinary or mixed methods to do this research. So it's very kind of wide ranging and drawing on a lot of different modes and kind of frameworks and systems of knowledge validation. And many of them are collaborating with well-known leaders in adjacent fields. So as you can see, we have a great group of emerging researchers actively exploring psionics in a UAP and NHI context, right? And they're wanting to contribute to this new emerging field. We also on campus, we have a subtle energies and consciousness lab with lots of equipment and devices. Our campus is based near San Diego and Encinitas, and we happen to have the largest Faraday cage on the West Coast, which is pretty cool. And students are able to take a course with me each spring on an anomalous research practicum to be part of the super experiencer research that I launched a couple years ago. So my vision here with this program, in solidarity with Jim and his program, is really to make a substantial contribution to training the next generation of UAP and NHI researchers who are focused on the role consciousness plays in all of this. So 2 years ago, I launched the WISER project. It's a 3-phase mixed methods research project on super experiencers. And this is essentially a research project on psionics. Though the term psionics wasn't in the cultural zeitgeist yet. So super experiencers is the term that made sense to me. And super experiencers are people who report having a wide range of anomalous and noetic experiences across what we've identified as 9 to 10 categories. And they have these experiences across these categories throughout their life. And there's currently 10 categories of experience. And I think this is important because I think this helps situate the conversation of psionics, similar to how Georg was providing some frameworks and ways of thinking about this. So these are the kinds of experiences that we're looking at in people. And near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, psychic and psychedelic experiences, UAP events and NHI encounters, noetic dreams, paranormal experiences, permeable self experiences, and mystical experiences, right? And so I situated the UAP events and the NHI encounters in this larger kind of landscape of consciousness, right? Trying to understand how do our experiences and encounters with UAP and NHI actually occur in this larger field of consciousness that includes these other kinds of experiences as well. So as I mentioned, there's 3 phases to the research. The first phase, which we're currently in, is a global survey aiming for 5,000 respondents. The second phase will be in-depth interviews with 150 of the survey respondents. The third phase will then involve neuroscience, brain imaging, genetic testing, and subtle energy analysis of at least 50 individuals. Right? So this is a 6 to 10 year research project that's just begun. And you can go and check it out at www.superexperiencer.org. And in the next few months, we're launching our full survey. We've been doing a pilot survey for the last 6 months. And we have an amazing group of 30 international advisors, including people this audience is likely familiar with, including Jeffrey Kripal, Gary Nolan and Peter Scaffish, Leslie Kane, Chris Bledsoe, who's here with us today and was one of the original inspirations for me to launch this research. So thank you, Chris, again, for your inspiration and guidance and being part of the advisory team. And then Kathleen Martin, really amazing researcher in the context of abductions. So I developed this research project in large part to explore the relationship between UAP and NHI and human consciousness, and to really try and better understand all the issues and topics that have been brought up today. Since humans often report a wide range of noetic and anomalous experiences in the context of UAP and NHI encounters, I wanted to situate those encounters in a bigger kind of view of what other kinds of experiences are happening before these encounters or during these encounters or after these encounters, what kinds of experiences cluster, where in one's lifespan do the certain kinds of experiences occur, early, midlife, later life, right? And so I just want to take a couple minutes to highlight some of the findings that we've discovered thus far. We have 300 respondents to our pilot survey, and so far, 90% of respondents have experiences in 5 or more categories, and 40% of respondents have experiences in 7 to 8 categories. And this totally blew me away out of those 10 areas that I mentioned just a moment ago. And what this highlights is that more people are having more types of experiences than we generally realize, right? And this is, on the one hand, it's very stunning. And on the other hand, it's just like, yeah, of course, right? Like as Bertie was saying, like, we all are psionic, human beings, right? We all have these capacities. And Kripal often talks about our superhumanity, right? That many people have a wide range of non-ordinary perceptual capacities, right? And so this research is validating that. The most common experiences, 85 to 90% of respondents report psychic, noetic dreams, and paranormal experiences. And I think this is interesting because certain types of experiences are more common than others. And these seem to be occurring in almost everyone. So almost all the respondents are reporting psychic, noetic dreams, and paranormal experiences. And these categories of kind of psionic, awareness are kind of very general and very broad categories of experience, which again, I think underscores how this is just part of being a human being and being embodied, that we are naturally prone to contact. We're naturally prone to experiencing the multidimensional reality that we're part of, but in our current kind of, materialistic paradigm, we tend to not kind of give ourselves permission to acknowledge that contact. And then 72 to 75% of respondents had either a UAP or an NHI encounter, right? So to me, this was really fascinating that, 72 to 75% had one of those two type of experiences. So again, a lot of people are having UAP and NHI encounters, and then, they're mixed with other types of experiences, right? And this is what I'm really interested in, is trying to understand the larger context of consciousness that's involved with these kinds of events and encounters. So we really need to study UAP and NHI in the context of all 10 types of these experiences. 60% of the respondents experienced both NHI and UAP throughout their life. So before, 72 to 75% experienced one or the other. 60% experienced both at different points in their life. And then only 20% experienced, or 27% rather, experienced both in an interconnected way. So on the one hand, there's a lot of people experiencing either NHI or UAP, but only 27% are experiencing those connected, either like a UAP event followed by an NHI encounter, or beings being associated with a craft, or orbs manifesting as UAP and or as conscious beings, or telepathic communication with beings during a UAP event, right? So only about a quarter of the respondents experienced UAP and NHI being connected in this way. I think this is important because there's a lot of phenomenon. Like we talk about the phenomenon. The phenomenon includes a lot of different realities, multidimensional and otherwise, right? So I think getting a better sense of like how different elements of the phenomenon are and are not connected is really important for better understanding psionics. And then people who had UAP or NHI encounters, they tended to report 2 to 5 over the course of their life. So there weren't a lot of one-off events. Usually if people had an experience of a UAP or an NHI, they tended to have 2, 3, 4, or 5 encounters during the course of their life, up to the point where they filled out the survey for us. And then in terms of quality of experiences, only 14% reported a negative experience, right? And several of you have pointed this out, that the vast majority of these experiences are either neutral or positive, and that's what we found. 85% were neutral or positive, and only 15% negative. So overall, these are really powerful and transformative experiences for people, and the phenomena does seem to be more benevolent than malevolent, but there is still an element that is kind of more negative. And then it was more common to have a UAP or NHI experience as a first experience when you're young than as an adult, right? And so there does appear to be a genetic or early disposition towards these experiences. And Jake Barber has also talked about this, with kids, being part of the program, right? So we do see that, experiencers do tend to often start very young. And even, like Chris Bledsoe had his experience a number of years ago, but as he reflected on it, he started realizing he'd had many experiences when he was very young. And that's a very common pattern that we see. So there's a number of clusters of experiences across one's lifespan that are quite noteworthy. So we see paranormal experiences, psychic experiences, permeable self experiences, and mystical experiences co-occurring together, right? Where people who have one of those experiences tend to mention they've had the other experiences at some point, right? So this is also very interesting to try and understand, how do these categories of experience really work? Like, are we drawing the line in the right spot? Are there different kinds of experiences? Are they the same kind of experience with different labels, right? So this again gets to the taxonomy and how do we begin mapping and understanding the relationship between this? So my final point is just that we've identified 8 meta profiles of super experiencers, or what we might think of as psionic humans, right? So these are kind of 8 different kind of, ways that we see in the data how people show up as psionic humans. So there's early trauma, early experiencer profiles, where trauma serves as an opening to the phenomenon. There's super experiencers. These are people who have a lot of experiences, a lot of different kinds of experiences, kind of all the time, like almost on a daily basis. There's legacy experiencers. These are people whose family lineage, their siblings, their grandparents, their grandparents also were experiencers. There's practice-based experiencers. These are people who use meditation and different protocols to cultivate contact. There's journey to belief experiencers, so people who have experiences, but it takes them a while to kind of warm up and accept their experiences, and they kind of ignore them and push them away for a while. And then there's adult onset experiencers, so people who do begin later in life. And there's hidden experiencers, people who kind of keep it to themselves and really don't tell anyone, right? And then lastly, there are neurodivergent experiencers, right? Where their neurodivergent seems to facilitate contact. Right, so this just gives like a quick kind of typology of some of the different paths to becoming a, psionic, right? And to being able to cultivate and make contact with the phenomenon in a variety of forms. So thanks, Jim. Great to be here with everyone.
Thank you, Sean. You're giving us a glimpse of the complexity of the world that we're entering. And there are many portals, and there are many pitfalls, and we need to pay attention. So, thank you very, very much. It's good to be in this academic field with you, opening up advanced degrees in this extraordinary domain of psionics and ET studies. So, thank you so much. I'm very aware, everyone, that we're significantly over time with the 2 hours we were going to use. So I thank everybody for your patience. This is such an extraordinary conversation. I'm loath to terminate it prematurely. So we're going to go another 30 minutes. We're going to go 3 hours rather than 2 hours. And I just hope the people can be patient for that, because there are two other people we want to hear from, and then we also want to have some discussion. So I'm going to turn it over to Georg now, who has been interacting with several physicists who he's going to bring into the conversation, and then we'll bring whoever's left on the conversation back in for a final dialogue. Georg?
Thank you, Jim. I now have the pleasure to introduce Bob Grenier to our panel today. Bob will probably be known to you if you have been looking into the field of alternative propulsion, cold fusion, exotic plasma objects, or ESP. He's one of the founders of the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project and has a wonderful YouTube channel and blog called Remote View, where he really does a great job at explaining these complex subjects and connecting the dots. So, Bob, if you're still there, I would invite you to turn on your camera so we can have you with us.
Hi, Georg. Can you hear me?
Yes, great to have you with us.
So thank you very much for inviting me, Georg, and thank you, Jim, for leading this. Ross for giving me some time back in January 2021 to share some ideas with him. And thanks to Pippa, you will see your father in your dreams. I'm no doubt about that. And it's great to be here amongst so many great minds like Richard, Sarah, Sean, and Chris. And Sarah, I know what it feels like to be feeling protected. Hopefully I can be as erudite as the speakers that have already spoken. And it's a shame that Jake could not make it, but I understand, and I thank him for his courage. So is it possible for me to share a presentation?
Absolutely.
So let's see if I can do that.
I'd really love to explore this idea of us being exotic technology.
Okay, so for those that don't know me, since 2012, I have been a volunteer for the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, which is an open project. It's really an idea. We have 3 directors. We had 5 originally, and we have researchers all over the world. I never expected to be finding the things that I have along this journey, some of which I will share extremely briefly. As my presentations are typically 2 to 3 hours long, given the time remaining, I'm only going to give you a very, very small snippet. You can read my work and engage with it at remoteview.icu, a blog that I set up in 2019 under the same name, with the strapline "Looking Back to the Future Through Insight and Critical Fiction." The MFMP's YouTube channel is here at MFMP. The X for that is Quantum Heat, and we've got a Kickstarter here for a book, Steps to the Discovery of Electronuclear Collapse, from Dr. Takaaki Matsumoto. Okay, so without further ado, what are you looking at on the right here? Well, this is actually a photo that I took last week of a hairdresser's where I got my hair cut for about best part of a decade. And back in 2002, I was discussing with my then girlfriend what I didn't know was called remote viewing back then. It's just that I get these feelings that something's going to happen. It just happens. I don't have any ability to stop it. So she says, well, the next time it happens, why don't you just tell the person that it's going to affect? I said, oh, I don't really feel comfortable doing that. It's never worked out for me. Anyway, so I was sitting in here in 2002 in this chair that you see here, and the hairdresser was in the gap between the chair and the glass here, and there was 3 other people with these mirrors here having their hair done by other hairdressers. I always use the same hairdresser as a guy, and there was a group of people in the chairs behind waiting to take their turn. And I got the same feeling I always get when I know something's going to happen. And it just comes over me, and normally I try to put it at the back of my head. I just got this feeling he was going to cut his hand. So I asked him, I said, you know, you are pretty nifty with those scissors. Have you ever cut your hand? He says, no, not in my entire career. And everyone in the room heard it. And within a few minutes, he had cut his hand between the webbing, and there was blood everywhere. Everyone looked at me like some sort of demonic person. and he ran into the back room, bandaged up his hand, and you could cut the silence with a knife. It was palpable. I was there in shock myself, because it was within 24 hours of me talking to my girlfriend. And I try and avoid that now anyway. So that's my introduction to my experience. My experience with orbs in the sky is very different, I think, from most. I actually encountered it to the first time in a more public setting with Ross Coulthart in January 2021. My father, who was a senior Mason and also very respected in the UK Navy, was asked me and my siblings to come down one late summer's night in 1979, look into the eastern sky in 32 Offington Gardens, Worthing, West Sussex, and these 4 lights came into the sky. They went and disappeared. And he said, right now, kids, you can go to bed. My dad is not an alien, and at least I don't think so. So without further ado, I will take you through a couple of slides here. If we are to assume that psionics is a thing, it's a new term, but if we are to consider it's a thing, one must consider its relationship to UAPs and how UAPs work. And so I've just put a couple of notes here that there must be a universe-wide medium with no time delay for read-write of information. There must be able to be engineered, or it must be able to be engineered or driven by self-organization. It must allow interaction with propulsion, must be possible to interact via consciousness, and must enable frictionless movement and trans-medium travel. So I'm just going to throw a couple of slides at you guys. Everything I have worked from has been first from what nature repeatedly shows. Because my view is, and this was a gift given to me by one Professor Francesco Piantelli in 2015, he said, don't tell nature what it is, let it show you. And he was the discoverer of the nickel-hydrogen low-energy nuclear reaction system. And my view on this is that nature cannot lie. It does not have an agenda. It does not have investors to please, reputations to protect, books to sell, secrets to obfuscate, conflicts of interest of any kind. It just does, given a particular parameter space. So that is the path that I took. And so on the first point of universe-wide medium with no time delay for read-write of information, I would refer to the concept of relic neutrinos, or the reality of relic neutrinos and clusters thereof. And in my view, this or something akin to this would constitute the real cloud, not the fake one we're all putting our life's information into right now, commonly called the Akashic record. You can't really learn about relic neutrinos by looking on Wikipedia or any of the current AI aggregations. So it's not the best place. However, I had the pleasure of meeting a fellow of the Royal Academy, the Russian Academy of Sciences in 2015, Dr. Alexander Parkhomov. He gave me this book, and I realized I needed to read it a few years later, and I got it translated with the help of a Kickstarter. And it turns out when I was actually doing the translation that the fourth chapter in this book was him being a senior member of the psychic spy program during the Soviet Union. And out of that, he was able to discover this thing that he initially called N radiation in his experiments. Every experiment is in the book, Space, Earth, Human, all the calculations, everything, but also the phenomena like ball lightning and black holes, and the psi phenomena research that he did that gave him the tools to be able to work out this research. He calls it Where Science Cannot Go. I think is the title of the fourth chapter. And yeah, so essentially they're about as similar to nuclear neutrinos as infrared is to gamma rays. So anyone thinking about nuclear neutrinos right now, it's not that. And they are produced by the sun, but they do not have enough kinetic energy to escape the sun's gravitational well. They go through all matter in the entire universe. And in that process, there is an information exchange with all matter. They are present as one universal coherent condensate at about 1.95 Kelvin. And that means they share one wave function. So like when you have a Bose-Einstein condensate, the individual atom waves effectively merge into one super quantum wave function. And this allows instantaneous universe-wide information insertion and retrieval, actually. And the question is, how can you do that? Well, we'll talk about that moving forward. If you look at all of the luminous matter and stars and gas in the entire universe, it constitutes 0.4% of the mass of the universe. If you add in non-luminous components and intergalactic gas and all of the black holes that exist in our universe, that adds another 3.6% of the mass. You add those two together and you get 4%, okay? In terms of dark matter, including neutrinos, that's up to 22%. And because relic neutrinos have mass, they could be in this 0.1 to 2% range, or they could be, there's no nuclear neutrinos because they essentially don't have mass. So we could be looking, depending on whether you're looking at luminous matter to neutrino upper limit or overall mass to dark matter upper limit. You're talking about 5 times more of this than there is everything we can see, including black holes. So there's a lot of potential for energy out there in the universe using this material. So I ask this question often of up to 500 people, often with PhDs in a room, and I ask them, what is static electricity? I'm not going to be embarrassing anyone here because I've never had an answer that made any sense. But essentially, we can call it this MTech term, which you're going to learn about in a second, magnetotor-electrical clusters. I'm going to explain what it is and the relationship between MTech and electrons. Essentially what I'm talking about is relic neutrinos and clusters of those that then become these MTechs. In the 19th century, the ether was treated like a jelly-like substance capable of transmitting transverse waves like light. Whittaker talks about this without specifically calling it a jelly in this book. This is an original copy of Whittaker's 1910 book on the history of the secrets of the ether and electricity. He really gives the initial concept to Stokes, which Maxwell extended. He says Stokes supposed the ether to be an elastic solid which is capable of executing vibrations of the kind required for transmission of light. So basically, this whole jelly-like concept of being able to transmit light. Well, one of the people I have worked with over the last years since 2018 is one Alexander Shishkin. He's a very senior doyen or a senior individual in the nuclear research in Russia from Cold War times. I've got a couple of links there you should go and check out. But he talks about these structures and it talks about how in low-energy nuclear reaction and cold fusion experiments, which I've done a lot of work in, that soft X-rays with energies up to 10 kiloelectron volts are constantly recorded under any rapidly occurring mechanical electromagnetic effects on matter. And if you go down, it says Tesla called the clusters that these are born out of radiant energy. Wilhelm Reich called them orgone energy. Messiac called them ectons. Shoulders called them charge clusters. Yuji Bazhatov called them erzions. Shakparanov, Kozyrev, Dirac monopoles. Beritskev, Loshak monopoles. And in everyday phenomena, this is called static electricity. So this is the magic source behind everything. And essentially, MTEX, they fill all of space around us, including all living and non-living objects, and they resemble, here we go, gel in their fluidity. If you do an EMP...
If I just may interject, because I think it's important that we try to maybe, I don't want to say dumb it down, but connect it to this idea of the medium we discussed before. So,
yes. So I'm discussing the medium now.
Yeah. Are you saying that there is actually workable theories for this medium of consciousness?
Yes.
That is.
Yes.
Yeah. And how would you suggest that the UFO program and the Psi program are connected then? Is that clear?
If I can step through, then it will become clear.
All right. The idea was to have maybe 3 more minutes or something.
Okay, I know it's a very short amount of time, so yeah, like I say. All right, I'll go very quick. It must need to be engineered, and it's a self-organizing phenomena. The ancients knew it. This is 400 BC. This is possibly 3,500 years or more ago, and essentially in the energy program of Project Sherwood by Winston Bostick, he took tori of plasma and he fired them at each other, making a tori of tori. And he produced these marks on witness material. It's like smoke rings. You get these kind of things going on. I defined this structure. This is a wheel within a wheel within a wheel, minimum structure. This produces a toroidal moment. These are some of our experiments. Like I say, we work from just experiments. This is ball lightning, and this is the internals of ball lightning, which is a torus and a cone feeding the torus, which is a tornado. They leave these marks when they impact onto material. This is the physical manifestation of them. And out of this work, I learned of the work of Vladimirovich Dubovik, who discovered the toroidal moment in 1965, published in his thesis in 1967. And this is the principle for the connection between all of these phenomena. And this guy should be given credit. Sadly, we lost him at the beginning of last year. Essentially, current loop, rotate that. The current loop forms a magnetic loop that produces a toroidal moment. Keep iterating that, and you get an n-level toroidal moment. This allows you to interact with this dark matter. And when I shared these ideas with the Russians, they came up with this Soviet classified research, and this was in this paper. And there's your toroidal moment. This is in mainstream papers now. And we have shown in experiment being able to make something absolutely instantaneously disappear. So this hemispherical section of copper pipe disappeared on video. And on the boundary layer, we have a 2-order, 3-order, 4-order, 5, 6, and 8-order structure. These are fractal structures. You see them all through nature. This is on an experiment. This is in the water. This is produced by one. It's called a water spout. And this is on another experiment. This is a 3-order structure, 2 triangular holes here, a triangle structure, a triangle structure. When you get to 4, the disruption beams do not come out. This is very important to what occurred with Jake Barber. The overall 4-order fractal structure looks like this. And this is exactly the same as on the Sumerian stelae and the sun, the way the sun works according to the sun cult in Italy, 400 BC. And so if you overlay this on the other, you end up seeing how it works. This is from the stelae in Sumeria. And it's the interaction between what's called the non-radiating boundary, but it's just too much to go into here. That's a 5-order, that's a 6-order. This is the cell unit of the flower of life. Okay, so this is physically observed. This is physically observed. This is from the magnetohydrodynamics. So John Wheeler spelt this out, and this is the very latest research on this is high energy plasma pulse into a nonlinear plasma. It produces the magnetohydrodynamic structure, and there's 1.36 thousand Tesla in this single pulse. But when you're doing it in a resonant process, that magnetic field can get up to 5 orders of magnitude more magnetic intensity than the center of our sun. It's equivalent to the center of a pulsar, which is a type of neutron star. And this is how the process occurs. So this must allow and interact with propulsion. So you get into the question of what is gravity, the push theory of gravity, Lesage's theory. I won't go into that. But basically, yes. Bob McElrath, we're getting there. Bob McElrath talked about relic neutrinos being a standard model, compliant model of gravity. This is the paper. You can look at it on this QR code here. And he was writing this for CERN theory group. Okay, so relic neutrinos also are an explanation for this work, which was published in 1999, where Professor Xu Wenju's team found various different properties of material changing, like atomic clocks changing their decay rate during 3-body alignments, that's lunar or solar eclipses, and elements changing their spectral output and a sideways movement. So you actually have a push because of diffusion, because of coming round and the gravitational lensing and 3-body alignment. Then magnetohydrodynamics is the key. This is a propulsion device in magnetohydrodynamics for a patent in 1964, and it shows how you vector that. And this is essentially similar to this one, which is 1971. It was filed, not actually filed 11th of December 1970. This is the British Railways Board anti-gravity craft. You can see these capacitor arrays that would allow for phasing to change the vectoring rather than this.
I'm sorry, Bob, I'm going to have to interrupt because I feel I need to just clarify and then bring it to a close. So
okay.
Are you saying that it is a way in which our bodies are made in a way in the image of the technology that runs the universe? Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, I'm a couple of slides away to get to how the psionics part interacts with these.
I'm putting your amazing blog into the chat. People need to spend time on this. Unfortunately, we just don't have time to go much further.
Okay, can I just throw a few more slides at you, please?
Unfortunately, it's difficult. It's getting difficult with the time.
Oh, okay. All right. Can I at least show you the slide where this relates to how the brain works?
Yes, that's a good one. Let's make that one our final one.
Okay, so
thank you so much. I'm sorry.
All right. It's an impossible thing, and I guess the propulsion was done in 1979, and that paper shows all of the properties that have been observed. This is in 1979. It shows all of the properties of UFOs that affect people and how they work. The psi phenomena comes here. 48 Tor there, Hal Puthoff there. Hal Puthoff, after he handed over the Psychic Spy program to Science Applications International Corporation, issued this patent in the September of the following year, which you have a coil going one way, a coil going the other way, and a capacitor plate. This produces a toroidal moment, whether he knew it or not. And this paper published in June 2023 shows that you're using functional magnetic resonance imaging, you get a magnetic vortex one way and a magnetic vortex, anti-vortex the other way. This produces a toroidal moment, and that allows you to interact with this conscious field. And if you want to go and see more, go and have a look at this one here and this one, which is summoning UFOs, which I did a long time ago. Okay. And the basic structure was the answer to the Arecibo telescope here. And this is the communication method here. And this is the communication method on the previous year. And this is me sharing it with the Russians here. It's the fractal toroidal geometry. And yeah, I mean, I can go into it's fine. There we go.
Yeah, I want everybody to be aware how critically important this research is and how it connects so many dots that we brought out here. So I'm dropping this amazing blog into the chat notes on YouTube and so on and so forth. And as a final kind of crazy question, that sounds crazy, but would you say that the reason that many Indian saints and siddhas or even Christian mystics like Tesla of Avila have been reported to levitate, is that possibly the same principle than UFO?
Well, I had slides to describe that, but essentially the way you produce these were called by Ken Shoulders exotic vacuum objects. They are emitted all the time from your fingers, and this is how it connects with faith healing, laying on of hands. It's how there's so many phenomena that you can do with this, qigong and whatever. When you go into, you need to produce a vortex and an anti-vortex, and you do that when you are sitting in the lotus position, and that vortex and anti-vortex produces the magnetic loop, which produces the toroidal moment. And if you're able, with the resonance of sound, go om like that, you can channel this chi force, which is all around us, through and condense it in a flux, and that is the anti-gravity.
Thank you so much, Bob. Thank you so much for taking it on to be part of this fantastic panel. I know it's a difficult subject to make coherent in such a short time. I would now like to introduce Dr. David Clemens, if you're still there.
I'm still here.
You're there. That's so great. Thank you so much. So last but not at all least, Dr. Clemens, I think you hold a very interesting part of the puzzle here, because you are both a theoretical physicist that holds degrees in theoretical physics from Oxford. You studied math and physics, Cambridge, but you also are a contactee, or even more than a contactee, somebody who says of himself that he has regular psychic ET contact. My question would be, what would you want to say to this panel today from your perspective that includes theoretical physics and ET contact about the subject of psionics?
Sure. Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me on. And it's been a pleasure to sort of even meet briefly people on the panel, which some of which I know and some of which I've never met before. There has been, yeah, it's interesting with listening to Sarah talk, and also Chris as well. I have a lot of resonance with a lot of their experiences. To give people a little bit of background, because I'm sure many people, I'm quite new to the scene on things. You know, I've been working and beavering away on my own way for quite some time, but never really publicly. So I began as a theoretical physicist. I worked in places. I worked in the same department as Stephen Hawking, late Stephen Hawking, when he was still around. And at that point, I was full on becoming a professional theoretical physicist in string theory, working on multidimensional spaces and magnetic backgrounds. And it occurred to me when I started doing my research early on in my PhD that, you see, I got into it because I really wanted to peel back the layers of how fundamentals work, how the universe works, and how it was all put together and how it was all functioning. I quickly realized that mainstream physics wasn't able to do that. And, you know, there are a lot of massive open questions still to this day, going back. Quantum field theory has been around for quite some time, and there's still huge gaping gaps of things that aren't in there. Now, during my first year, a friend of mine bought me a book, and it was to do with all sorts of phenomena, including remote viewing. And so I kind of read this. It got me kind of excited because I thought, well, I've never done this before. I don't know if it works, but I'll have a go and see if it's something that I can do, or if it's even tangible. And had a colossal experience in my first attempt, which was after I flipped over the card. It was a volcano, but before that, I had these immense rumblings and visceral feelings of the actual sensory perception of being there, literally located in the middle of the volcano. It was so powerful that I got up and had to drop my pen and stop the viewing session. I walked into the kitchen, and while I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, the sensations continued, and it took, you know, quite a few minutes to actually the sensory data just to fall away and stop. So for me, that was proof positive that there was something absolutely there. But that really served to kick off my sort of, how you say, energetic sensitivity. And then I had contact with a group of beings from the Pleiadian system. And their focus with me was really to learn to develop and clear perceptive constructs in my mind, in my being, so that I could work in a way that was more closer to a sort of pure perceptive, heart-centered perception. And so as that went along, I was concurrently doing physics, and like with Sarah, you know, I totally understand. I totally get it, Sarah, with your having to you know, work on one hand in your job and then work on the other side with you know, a kind of a secret life in a way. And so it was kind of interesting because it got to a point, because I also work with Dr. Tom Bearden and John Bedini, and we collaborated on energy projects and development of systems and energy systems there. And it got to the point where I realized I can't operate in mainstream physics anymore. It's too there's no way of explaining or doing anything with any of these systems and understandings of mainstream physics. So I left to start my own research. And at that time, I also had contact with Arcturian groups as well. Now, their focus with me was also because the Arcturians have a similar heart-centeredness to the Pleiadians, but they have an absolute, well, adeptness at energetic sciences. And what they were teaching me about was multidimensional living energetics. Now, it's a big departure from the sort of more structural-based physical physics that I was being taught. Now, as I spent the years developing this and working with them and understanding, what really came to the forefront for me was that, and they said it one time because they were helping me develop toroidal systems, not unlike what Bob was showing there. And they said, one of the things that you need to bear in mind is that when you perceive this through the mind, the mind inherently has a set of filters on it, which can only take you to a certain point. But in all things, and they were saying, like they had to in their evolutionary process a long, long time ago, they had to switch from mind-centered consciousness to heart-centered consciousness. And in doing so, they are able to perceive things that inherently a mind-based perception is not able to go into and see. So in other words, it's seeing beyond structure of every kind. It's not just, you know, and so that's something they've been training me to do for quite some time. And they also taught me to bilocate as well. They showed me a way I could sit here physically, bilocate, and literally go onto their ships and have conversations with them. And it is very interesting because my feeling while there is that first, the protocol they have is they want me to literally get a quantum snapshot of their energy so I can understand who I'm dealing with, what their intent is, and what they're offering essentially. And I find that, you know, people have mentioned about sort of good and negative groups and that kind of thing. And with positive ETs that genuinely have a focus on helping people expand and move forward, I find there is an emphasis on helping people to learn how to live and be responsibly energetically, so you understand who you are dealing with, what it is that you would like to get out of the encounter, and what it is that they are offering from the encounter as well. And it's a very heart-centered connection. So they will wait, and they will wait for you to get the quantum snapshot. You will feel their energy directly. And then when you decide that, okay, this is, I really, you beings are great. You're very heart-centered, and I think we can work together. Then they begin the conversation. And so I've done that a number of times. And one of the things they've shown me is that this interconnected, when you talk about psionics and consciousness and things like that, there is a what they describe and what I've come to speak about now is the living source intelligence, which is literally is from my perspective is the intelligence of love. We all talk about love as being all sorts of romantic and emotional things, but love itself is the expansive intelligence behind everything, as for what they have shown me. And it's layers upon layers of different fields and interconnects between those fields that we eventually get down to what we see as physical reality, and this highly compressed, highly condensed state of which we call matter. And as the lady before, I think it was Pippa was saying, there is this issue with science and, other philosophies where science thinks that everything is structural and material. And it's just a case of working out the mathematics and the machinations of the material structure and how they. But to me, what they've shown me is, in fact, matter is just a highly compressed state in a very organized way of fluid living energetics. And it's what we perceive as matter. It's so highly compressed, it behaves in such overly simplistic ways. You can bang into it, it moves away. There's a very simple operating system of energy there, and the way things behave. But inherently behind it is a living energy consciousness. So matter itself is conscious, and everything between it is conscious. And when you learn to unpack that and unfold it and learn about everything from magnetic compression and all sorts of things, like Bob was talking about, toroidal fields are central to this kind of thing. You get to understand the living energetics behind it and how fluid living fields work. And I first experienced this kind of field, or conscious living field, and I believe it has a big impact on what your topic is today, because when I was in John Bedini's lab, I experienced when his devices were switched on. These are helically wound, more or less they mimic a kind of very basic torus, but it's not quite, it's similar. But the way that the pulses move through and create this center point as the energy winds through and spirals through the coiling, it opens up a literal gateway where this new energetic field presents itself. Now, at the time, I was very sensitive to energetics, and I already had contact with these teams. And what I found interesting was when I walked into John Bedini's lab, it was an open box. The doorway was open here. You could walk straight through. There weren't any doors. The second you passed through the threshold of that door, the energy just it flew up really high. And I moved back out of the door. Again, there was nothing physical there, but the energy chose to retain itself inside this confinement. And so after playing around with it, I realized this is a living conscious energetic, and it will interact with you, and you can symbiotically work with it as another consciousness. So I built my own versions and tested these, and exactly the same thing happened. And so I worked with my teams to design devices that would generate these living energetic fields. And further,
David, just to clarify for people, maybe they were confused when you say teams. When you say teams, you mean teams of extraterrestrial intelligences talking to you on a regular basis?
Yeah, it's two classes. There are ETs. There are some that are more physical, some that are more field and expanse-like, and others that are not incarnate in bodies at all. They're almost a field-like intelligence. Mm-hmm. So there's three main classes of different beings that I interact with, and the thing that they also helped me to understand was the coded nature of energies. So energy isn't just energy. It's like saying with an ocean, you could say, oh, the ocean is just water, but no, there's a plethora of living organisms and other structures and other things inside the ocean, which just looking at a flat pond, you think, oh, it's just still water. That's all it is. But it's not. There are so many exotic things that are in the makeup of energy and fields that we talk about. And so they help me to understand the coded aspect of that and how you could change the coding and the energetic conditions of fields and so forth. But
sorry, David, sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
I believe you and Bob would hit it off and we could have a 6-hour webinar just for the two of you.
Right.
However, looking at the
Time is
time,
limited,
I would
right?
I would
Okay.
like to slowly
Sure.
but surely move into whatever we can still do of
Yeah,
a
sure, that's
discussion
fine.
at this
No worries.
point.
Okay.
And
What would you like me to focus on now?
Yeah, maybe just some final comment on what you've seen people discuss about psionics in the ethics and sovereignty of human beings engaging in this, and what your sense is of if this is safe or if this is for everybody, and what's the purpose of this.
That's a very good point. Okay, yeah. So what I would say is that the beings that I've encountered were very clear about the kind of protocol in approaching, and doing this. Because unfortunately, there are parasitic consciousnesses out there that want to do all sorts of things. They are, like Sarah says, they're not that powerful, but they can be deceptive. Now, one of the key thing to this is in my experience. So I'll just share my view of how this is, again, everyone can take their own take on this and go their own way, do what they want. But the way I do this is the higher intelligence within you, and this is what the beings talk about, that the first point of contact is your intelligence within, the heart center. So you have a very powerful, multidimensional, some call it a fractal layering system, of intelligence within your heart center that extends out from here and generates into the entire being, right down to the DNA that makes your physical body. Now, what happens is that when you interact with these beings, the good ones, the first of all that they'll try and ask you to do, which I've found, is they'll ask you, okay, can you feel my energetics? Can you tell who I am through my energetics? And can you see who I am and what I'm about? And one of the things that I find that some people miss is they go straight in, they want contact, but they don't yet understand how to energetically sense who it is they're working with. It's the same with working with a person on the ground. You want, are they deceptive? Are they telling you lies? Are they trying to manipulate you? When you become energetically sensitive and you connect with that heart intelligence, it can see all of that. It can sense all of that. You can't fool the intelligence in the heart center. You can fool the mind, because in clever, deceptive ways, people can run around and do all sorts of things, and even present pretty images that look great, but underlying the energetics aren't there. So heart-centeredness connection, to me, is absolutely vital. It's center. For me, there's no other way of doing it. Once you have that connection with your heart center, and you can ask your higher self, your higher intelligence in your heart center, if you would like contact, to then begin the learning process of how you contact a group of beings that you're looking to contact with, or allow your higher self to suggest to you who would be best to work with you right now, given your current energetic state, path, and evolution, and so on. And so it is right in the heart center is something that my teams call the infinity point. It's a gateway. And it's the gateway to the infinite source intelligence within. Every human being has this. No one is devoid of it. So, I mean, when Jake was talking before about, some people have this gift and some people don't. In my experience, I would say that that's certainly true on a certain level. But the truth is, everybody has the ability to get in touch with the infinity point and then gain that contact with the infinite source within. And then from there, you have a complete ability to have a spectral map, if you like, a full energy snapshot of any being you come across. So you can determine and feel for yourself if that is somebody or a being or a group that you want to work with that has your best interests at heart, or if they're acting in deception. So
thank you, David. Thank you, David. I think this is a great point. I'm sorry to interrupt, to move into this discussion, because when I understand you correctly, you're saying we are equipped with a type of multidimensional heart intelligence that allows us to discern if we want to have contact with this entity or not.
Yes, and that's important because, like I said, it's some, even people with experience are dealing with some very clever people and can be quite deceptive. They can be quite convincing, but the heart does not get fooled that way. It can have so when I go up onto one of their ships, for example, they offer me the opportunity to get what they call a quantum snapshot, which is it's not a linear time expanse of their energy. It's an all-in-one picture of their energy. So I can then sit, feel it, work through it, and understand who it is I'm working with and what it is they're offering on that level. And they are so keen, and I think there's a message from them. They are so keen for humanity to learn this, because humanity has a full suite of sensory, energetic gifts, like to unpack. Everybody has it. Nobody's special or above anybody else, and it just requires you to just take the patience to go into the heart center, connect with the higher self, and go through the process of unpacking that and learning to use it.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much. Thank you, Bob. Jim, I think this is the moment to move this into
Yes,
the
thank you
brief discussion.
both. And your last point, David, is the dialogue that we would like to have now. So those of you who are still in the realm of the living, having gone well over 3 hours. This has been amazing. We thought we were going to go 2. It's ended up well over 3. We're going to stop it in the next 15 minutes. But I think that what David was just talking about is what we need to discuss. And I'd like to turn first to you, Bertie, and Chris, as two people who've had such deep experiences yourselves. Is what David just described, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, what David describes absolutely resonates with me. I do find that when I approach everything in my own remote viewing with this sense of adventure and sense of love, that I get so much more information and so much more deep connection with the experience that I'm having. And I'm able to move around and explore the experience and have an in-depth interaction with whatever it is, whether it's an event in the past or an extraterrestrial civilization on the other side of our galaxy. It's that sense of intent and love moving forward that allows these connections to happen. So absolutely.
Okay, I'd like to go to you then, Chris, and then Sarah, but I want to hold open the point that Richard made earlier. And that is, and I think it's implied in what you were saying, David, that not all of these beings are as benevolent as we would like, that there is malevolence out there.
Yeah.
So I think that also needs to be taken into our conversation as a reality we need to understand and therefore develop a orientation toward.
Yeah.
But Chris, how do you respond to what David was saying?
Well, I agree on a lot of it. Pretty much from as an outline, a framework for it. Yeah, I agree. The he said a lot, right? It was very. I just have to say, my experience is not in the remote viewing realm. It's more of a physical thing. In other words, they come when I walk outside, or they come in my house. So it's not like I'm communicating with a vast array of different types of entities out there. It's all based on a relationship with a family. And that's the best way I can say it. An old friend of mine from NASA, I met him in 2008. He died. He was with NASA, worked there with them 60 years. He had security clearances till he died. And I used to ask him, what is it? Why did this happen to me? And he said, Chris, he said, the best thing I can tell you, they're your family. And they'll always be your family. So once you meet them, it's what I did. I had no clue I was going to run into this. I'm calling out to God and UFOs came. That's kind of why I named the book UFO of God. But from that point forward, it's always been a physical thing to where I'm interacting with that. For 18 years, I go out at night, I say a little prayer, and here they come. And so it's a physical interaction for me, and not something that I'm remote viewing, if I can say that. So if that makes sense, it's in the physical.
Actually, sorry to kind of, can I just say, I really agree with what you're saying there, Chris, and all of you guys have some amazing things that I have such resonance with and across the board, and like particularly with you, Sarah, because of your background, and it sort of parallels a lot with what's happened to me too. But
Right.
you know what? One of the things that the beings made clear to me is that what's happened is because of this experience of duality and this compression down into the lower realms of what we call the third and fourth dimensional experiences, is that when beings lose their contact with their inner gateway in their heart center, the infinity point, they lose access to a high degree of the emanations and the living energetics that naturally come forward out of that center, the love intelligence. What happens then is that's when they go into a fear state and they become parasitic, because like all beings that lose access to something they've always had, they then start to grab it from everybody else, and in a very simplistic way, that's kind of what's happened to these negative groups. I know they have different stories, different histories and backgrounds and everything, but essentially in a very simplistic framework, it's that they have turned into parasitic life forms because they have lost the innate connection within the heart center. It's possible to get it back, but if you go too far, it becomes really hard, because it becomes that center becomes so blocked and so hardened, you don't even know it's there anymore, And so I just wanted to follow on with what you were saying, Chris, because I think and what Bertie was saying, and with Sarah and everybody else here as well, I think has the theme of, is that the open-heartedness is almost like a resonance calling to these higher beings to say, you are open, I resonate with your openness, we can have a connection. And that's where the greatest connection of that comes from, when you have that level of open-heartedness. So I just wanted to add that.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
One thing I'll add to this is 18 years ago when this happened, it was a bit major thing because it happened in the broad daylight. It wasn't a dream. It was there it is, and it came and took me for 4 hours. And immediately I was thrust into a bunch of folks from NASA. I got to meet a lot of them and study with them and work with them for a better part of 10 or 11 years. And I'm still in touch with some of them. But one thing I learned a lot through my interaction with them, and they would always use this term of yin and yang, where there's good, there's bad. Where there's we live on a dihole. This planet is an energy producing machine. You can see it in the aurora, right? So its principal rules are negative and positive poles, like on a battery in the car. You got a negative and you got a positive. And the way they presented it was, there are these lines on Earth, and they're very close together, not way out apart, but they're like a hatch. And these negative energies run down one way and positive the other. If your house happened to have one of these negative lines running through one corner and your child slept in there, it could affect your child's health very easily. But we have a force around us that guards us from that negative force. And that's exactly what they told me when I put it out there. The triangles on their chest got everybody's attention from NASA and all over. We want to know more about that triangle. And but they told me then that as long as you stay centered and faithful and that love in you, you don't have to worry about the negative stuff.
Yeah.
It's all right here. You keep that heart shining and you're good to each other and you care about people. Somebody gets sick, you feel bad for them. then that makes you shine and that keeps that darkness away. But if you're narcissistic, you know it all, you're skeptical, you want to tell the world, you want to point fingers at this person and that, you don't stand a chance to experience it.
Yeah.
You're your own worst enemy. And so that's how I can describe, without being so scientific into it, from my personal experience. That's how
Thank you.
Can I just add one more thing to that?
David, I'm sorry. I'd like
sure,
to hear
sure.
from Sarah, then Sean,
sure.
and Richard before we have to close in 10 minutes. So we'll circle back to you.
Oh, no,
maybe
sure.
at
That's fine.
time,
No, no
but,
worries.
go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, that's great. I have really loved all of this, and something that Bertie said that I was wanting to address, that she mentioned everybody is psionic, and it's true. Like everyone, the first thing you learn in spiritual classes is everyone has this ability. We're all born with it. It's just our ego and our upbringing saying it's crazy and woo-woo is not real. And so I also I've seen some comments saying it's hard to follow this love thing. Like everything is about love, but when you think about it, it's really true. And it really does boil down to opening your heart, and love isn't just romantic. It's stopping to watch a butterfly fly by and enjoying watching a bald eagle fly as well. I mean, it is enjoying a moment of sunshine on your face when you take a few deep breaths and you appreciate that feeling when that sunshine hits your skin. That's love. So it really does boil down to it's love. And it's so cool to say and for people to actually be open to this as well, that love isn't binary. It's not, I love my family, I love my partner. It's everything around us and within us. And this discussion has been so great because of I've been learning from a lot of you all as well. And so yeah, that was kind of like off track from what you guys were just previously saying, but I just wanted to say thank you, I guess, is most importantly, thanks for being a part of my journey.
I don't think it was off point at all. I think what you just said, Sarah, is actually the bottom line. I think what's being underscored here is that the human being we have our sovereignty. And our sovereignty lies in our heart. And it's empowered by a disposition of open-heartedness and love. I think that's basically what I'm learning from Bertie. That's what I'm learning from Chris. I think you've articulated it, David, in very eloquent ways. And Sarah, I think you're underscoring it. And I'm just wondering whether Sean and Richard would agree with this proposition as we bring this conversation to a close. What's your sense, given your taxonomy, Sean, about the centrality of love in the human heart as we approach extraterrestrial beings?
Yeah, I'll add a couple quick comments. Yeah, my experience is that love and heart-centered awareness is crucial, and that telepathy often is more of a feel think than like a mental think. Quality of connecting, like really from the heart, sometimes with images. So I really resonate with everything that's been said. Two places I go that I think are worth weaving into the conversation, for the future is I was listening to Jeffrey Kripal talk about the telepathy tapes recently, and he was highlighting how religious traditions tend to point to anything that doesn't fit within their frame as demonic. And so I think often when we talk about negative entities, at least half of those encounters are just encounters with beings that look different or weird, or we don't understand, or we're not sure how to relate to. And I think humans, we tend to be xenophobic. And I think we're in a period in our geopolitical system where there's a lot of us-them dynamics. And so, I think we have to look at like the dynamics of human consciousness and how quickly we tend to fall into anything that's different is bad or evil or wrong or out to get me. And so I think we have to understand those psychological emotional dynamics in people, because a lot of the negative encounters with, ETs, I think, are not negative entities in and of themselves. They're just the way we're responding to the situation. The other thing I would say is, there's so many different types of beings, and extra dimensionals and extraterrestrials and extratempestrals and cryptids and egregores and fairy beings and angelic beings and ghosts, and it's actually, as I refer to in some of my work, it's a wild cosmos. Like, there are a lot of different types of intelligences. And so one thing that I see happen is people tend to have a frame of 1, 2, or 3 types of beings that they feel exist, and then they tend to view and relate to every type of encounter within that framework. And so they're often mislabeling fairy beings as angels or angels as ETs. And so I think we're in a process as humans of kind of expanding our reference points and developing a finer level of intuitive discernment between what types of beings are we dealing with, and how do we label them, how do we understand them. So I think these are 2 important things of kind of how do we continue to clarify the types of beings we're interacting with, and not just have 2 or 3 main buckets, when my experience, and I think the literature shows, we're dealing with dozens of major different categories. And then how do we work with human tendencies to be othering of anything that looks or feels different than what we're used to?
Very good point. Very good point. Richard, what's your final takeaway on this question of the right human orientation to these beings?
Yeah, there's been so much that's been said here, lots of fascinating insights. I was interested in a lot of the things, Bob Grenier, you were talking about this idea of ether. I've wondered about this myself, and I'm not a scientist, but I am convinced now that there's got to be some kind of substrate out there that allows us to have this type of non-local communication. I think it's got to be true. And much more of that was said, I think, is Riley spot on. If I had a different perspective, which I do, and I don't want anyone to hate me for it, I would just say I think that we cannot forget that a lot of these contacts are physical. They're not simply mental or spiritual, and that there are physical beings involved in this interaction. And as such, I would say that I would go on the assumption that physical beings have physical needs, which means to eat, sleep. And like every single physical being that I'm aware of on planet Earth, not just humans, they're territorial, probably. Like us, they're used to getting their own way. We can talk about love all we want, but we still have turned the entire planet into our little suburb, and we've conquered every single species that's out there, and we act like we own them all, and we can do whatever we want with them. I don't know how spiritual or loving that is. We just use them and we take it for granted. So the idea about positive and negative I'm kind of cold on that, to be honest. It doesn't really have a lot of meaning to me. What is positive? What is negative? Negative is something I don't like. Negative is hate, not love. It gets really kind of there. I'm not happy with the lack of definition there. It just seems like it goes in different places. I realize there's people in the chat that are like, no, negative is fear, whatever. But again, I'm not on board with some of the way this is being framed. On the other hand, on a personal level, I am convinced that if we can talk about spirituality, which is important to me personally, that the idea of tapping into one's higher authentic self, that is, as I perceive it, a conscious mind that I would call God. It's what it is to me. Like, that's real, and that's something that's very important to me. And I will assume that that's important to other advanced intelligences, whether out there or in here or in whatever dimension they are. Like, that's probably important for them too. So there's a lot of area for common ground with us and any other intelligences. But I would just say, if I'm meeting a bunch of new friends, but one of them happens to be Genghis Khan and he's got an army outside, it doesn't really matter to me that 90% of them are wonderful. I'm going to be concerned about that one guy who's might be dangerous. And there's nothing that has persuaded me that there isn't at least potentially something like that out there. So you can call that fear-based, but I would just call it, I would like to be as realistic about this as I can. And if they're physical, then again, I would like to know what it is that would make them to go beyond having physical needs and physical desires that have motivated every earth-based life form that I can think of. Why should they be different? Why can't you have an interstellar economic hitman, if I can borrow the phrase of an old book? Nothing logically mitigates against that. There could be rapacious, greedy, little interstellar bastards just like us. And why would that be an illogical thing? So, you know, I think personally, I think that we right now, we human beings, we're the interest of a lot of groups out there, because why wouldn't we be? We're actually very interesting. You know, we've made this amazing transformation in such a brief period of time, and we don't even know where we're going to end up. So we're playing around with interdimensionality. We're playing around with quantum physics and quantum computing and everything else. We're transforming our species right now into something that I don't even think we can predict. So yeah, they're going to be interested in us. And whether that means they look at us with a warm eye or a cold eye is something that I think is very important that we want to really think about. Because if I were them, I might very well be looking at humanity thinking, they're a real problem, these people. They don't stop. They are every bit as territorial as we are, and we may not. You know, there's a lot of reasons to wonder that there may be some real challenges up ahead with all of this. And I just think that the focus on heart-centeredness and love is a wonderful thing in my personal life. I try to abide by that. But I just think that there's probably other complexities in here that we will want to address at some point. And with that, I will tell you, I've enjoyed everyone here, and I'm glad that I was able to participate in this amazing panel.
Thank you so much,
Hop in.
Richard.
Richard, I loved all of that. Thank you so much. That was fantastic.
Yeah, no problem.
Can I say anything?
Yes, just as briefly as you can, and then I think we'll bring it to a close.
Yes, on the subject of love, I have argued that just like this fractal toroidal geometry here, wheel within a wheel within a wheel within a wheel, the DNA is your cryptographic key, and it's because it is a wheel, it's a coil of a coil of a coil of a coil, just like I just showed you here. And you have a public key that you can give out. And because these plasma entities are also these fractal toroidal geometry internally, they can interact with conscious field, and you can do that through your DNA by opening up. And it is that private key you exchange in love within individuals, as well as that feeling of love that you project to interact with these entities, and they can sense that. And I would argue that that is what's going on.
Fabulous. Love is embedded in the very structure of our cosmic DNA. That's a beautiful, beautiful thought. I'm realizing, Georg, quick final word.
Actually, I don't, but I believe, David, you wanted to say something. Did I see that right? Did you have a...
Sure, just a final word. Yeah, just to take off what Richard was saying. I think it really comes down to where beings act from. Now, love is just not, to me, is not just a nice romantic word. It's a living intelligence. And when people talk about, like, say, a parasitic civilization or a civilization that wants to conquer or do things, where is that intent or wish to do that coming from? And so when you look at matter, organized matter, you know, why does it organize the way it does? Why does it assemble itself and have the intent to do motion the way it does? What is the controlling intelligent factor behind it? And what my teams have told me is that the very advanced races that have learned to open up to that intelligence, that core intelligence. And it's not something you can define, because the word is a structure, and the living intelligence has no structure. Structure makes up about 2% of entire existence, according to the beings that I work with. So, asking for sort of a quantitative structural definition when you're talking about nebulous living fields that haven't compressed themselves into structure yet, you'll never get a defined answer. It just doesn't work that way. But what I would say is that just from my experiences of what I've found with these groups is that they have this benevolent look to others, because when you reach into and you align yourself with that non-structural living intelligence that we call the word of love, or whatever you want to call it, this centralized source intelligence, it is connected to everything. It knows what some being in the farthest reaches of the universe knows, wants, wishes, and would love for itself, as well as somebody the other side. It knows how to balance. And I think that's the point. When you disconnect from that center and you operate in a singular, almost sort of personality stroke ego level, you have the propensity to start saying, mine, 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 my territory, all this stuff, and do all those negative things you talked about. So I just wanted to say that I feel that from my experience, this is just this is my perspective, everybody has their own, of course, is that by aligning and practicing the alignment with that source intelligence, benevolence is innate. And, the wish to do good for others as well as yourself is innate. I don't think that's something which is a manufactured thing. I think it's an innate quality of the living intelligence, or what we call source love. And again, my experience with these benevolent beings, they've achieved that. They have opened the fields within themselves to such a degree that is a normal functioning, experiential, day-to-day thing for them, if you want to call it that in a human way. So that's just my take on what you were saying. I just felt like just sharing that.
I love that. You were basically describing entropy, though. So entropy is always changing and always growing, and so is the love out in the universe.
Well, I think we'll leave it at this moment. But the fact that we've gone nearly 4 hours, everyone, for a 2-hour program, I think speaks to how intensely important this issue really is. And now that we're drawing to a close, we're getting to the fundamental issues that we all as human beings need to address. So I want to say that we're going to be back. And it's my hope that the people on this panel that have been so deliciously diverse and interesting and authentic, because everybody's spoken from their own personal experience. I hope that our next online event will start where we've left off. And we'll have something on the question of love in the development of psionics, within the context of a very layered and complex universe that I think both Sean and Richard have spoken to, which needs to be taken into account, which doesn't negate the importance of love, but it frames it in a way that we need to proceed prudently with our eyes wide open, so that we ensure not only our sovereignty, but that our initial contact, which is what our generation has been bequeathed the responsibility for, is a contact with these beings that future generations can build on.
Right, yeah, definitely.
In a constructive way. So the fact that we've ended with love is a very important conclusion for this first summit on psionics. Thank you, everyone. This has been extraordinary. This has been absolutely extraordinary.
Thank you very much, David.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It's lovely to meet you all, and I'm glad to. Some of you I've seen on documentaries and things in the past. It's a joy to see you guys.
Real honor.
Yeah, definitely.
We'll be back.
Everyone.
We'll be
Thank
back.
you so much.
Great and honor.
Yeah.
Thank you to all of the listeners as well.
Yeah.
Take care, everybody.
Nice to meet you, Bob, and David as
And
well.
you, Chris.
Yeah, you too as well. And to any of you guys, if you feel like reaching out, because I feel like quite a resonance for, you guys, and just reach out. I don't know, and vice versa. I guess I'll try and reach out with you guys too.
Absolutely.
And,
We'll be in touch.
Agreed.
Thank you to the
Totally agree.
amazing audience of 1,000 people staying on for
Yeah.
several hours. You guys are awesome. So thank you all to make this possible, and see you soon.
All right.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.